Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Lettuce Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Becomes Weapon Dealer? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku Midoriya loved people, they just didn't seem to like him much in return. He had tried so hard for so long to be the beacon of light his childhood hero had been, but he had been met with so much resistance, he had come to the upsetting realization that Japan didn't want him to be the next All Might, they really just wanted him to go away. He was quirkless, people said he was just as valuable as anyone else, but they said it with pity in their eyes. He hated when people looked at him with pity. Deku had wanted to help people, but after hundreds of rejection letters, he had decided he would have to do it in a less clean, less public way. The first thing he manufactured was a suit of armor essentially, it had spring boots and some gadgets. He would go out in the streets and protect people like that American bat guy. He had no idea how he had gotten from that to what he was doing now. He supposed it started when someone offered him some money for one of his inventions, they had seemed trustworthy enough, and he had been tired of choosing between food and heat, so he had given it to him. Apparently that guy had friends, and he had wound up getting requests pretty frequently, and they paid him well enough he could get a nicer place, he could actually feel human. He wasn't sure where they were taking his weapons, and he wasn't sure how much he cared. He told himself he cared a lot, and that he only sold things to people who seemed like good people. Friends? But the truth was, he was worried if an obviously bad person was to ask for his help, he wouldn't be able to say no. He didn't see the collateral damage that his lifestyle was built upon, so he didn't have to think about it, and so he didn't. Except on mornings like the one he met her. Deku was quiet as he sipped his tea and watched TV, he was trying not to think about Katsuki Bakugo, how he had seen his childhood friend on the news, he had looked worried, he was asking for anyone who had seen a skinny man with green hair, green eyes and freckles. Deku felt like a dumbass, of course Kaken would know who Deku was. It was a nickname he had given him. He had known that if Kaken ever saw anything he had made, with his logo he would recognize it. In fact, part of him had taken some pleasure in the idea. Number 1 hero Dynamite, scared of quirkless, worthless Deku. But Kaken didn't seem worried for the reasons he had hoped he would be. He seemed worried about Deku. Deku was doing good at ignoring the guilty voices in his head, until he heard something fall down in his lap. God damn it. He knew he was a pain in the hero's asses, but was he really worth this? He took his tea with him into his lab ready to start yelling when his expression softened. Uravity? Really? Kaken couldn't even come himself? This is my home. You cannot just come in here. He laughed softly when she jumped, looking at his feet, but it broke his heart a little when he noticed the way she trembled. I'm not going to hurt you. He murmured as he shook his head and a self-deprecating laugh left his lips. I was just watching TV, and I heard a noise in here and I was worried something broke. He saw the invention he had been working on for months levitating, he laughed again, she was cute. He had had a bit of a crush on her ever since he first saw her on the news, but she would never be with someone like him. Why are you here? I haven't done anything in months. And that thing you almost broke is just a toy for me. It's a jetpack. I wanted to see if I could fly. She wasn't listening, she was focusing on not breaking his stuff, which he appreciated. He went to take it and set it on the table again. Did you hear a word I said? Why are you here? Dynamite wanted to make sure you're not working on anything that can hurt people, that's what he said anyways. I think he's worried you're dead or something. Being held hostage, she smiled at the ground, but you look like the kid he described. And if you want to fly I can help, she blushed, looking up at him. His eyes lit up, Uravity was adorable inside and out. Really? I'd be happy to, she murmured. I am breaking and entering, and that wouldn't be good for my good girl image. She joked. Deku laughed at the ground, his eyes widened when he felt her hand touch his own, he really was not touched often. Was that okay? I'm sorry, I should have asked. No. It was nice, he smiled at her and looked at the ground, his cheeks were bright red, Uravity had touched him. She touched his hand. He didn't notice he was floating until he was near his ceiling, he smiled down at her, looking down at her, he didn't even really care that he was flying at this point. She let him down and frowned. You didn't like it, she sighed. No, I did, I was just, distracted. He sighed. Touching was how her quirk worked. Of course he knew that. He also knew that he was so touch-starved that he honestly thought he might be in love with her. How pathetic was that? By what? She asked bashfully. And nothing. Oh, okay, she bit her lip and nodded. I'm sorry I broke in. I think I'm going to go. Wait, he didn't want to be alone again. She turned back to look at him. See, can you stay a little longer? He said softly, folding his hands in onto each other. She frowned a bit as she looked at him. She wanted to, but she also was still a bit threatened by him, and the way her stomach was tying itself in knots would not be helpful if things went south. Please, he said softly, against her judgment. She nodded her head as she stepped back towards him. She thought he was cute. She liked his freckles. She gently grabbed his hand, turning red and smiling at the ground as they went up the stairs into his house. It was nice. She bounced on the balls of her feet and looked at him. This place is nice, she whispered. How, He rolled his eyes. How did I afford this? As a quirkless man? There are ways to make money without dash, he sighed, pulling his hand out of hers. She shook her head. That's not what I was asking, she said softly, gently touching his hair. He looked at her and leaned his head against her hand. Sorry, people like to question if I deserve my stuff because I don't have a quirk, he said softly. She sighed, nodding. Yeah, she said softly. He didn't seem like a villain. He seemed like a child who was acting out because he was hurting. She wondered what he planned to do with her. She didn't think he would hurt her. In fact, she was kind of excited. He took her into the kitchen, pouring her some tea. How do you take it? He asked softly. I'll drink whatever you're drinking, she said softly, smiling at him and looking at her feet. He nodded. You sure? Yeah, she said softly. He handed her some green tea before taking her free hand and leading her to his media room. She sat next to him and sipped her tea as she looked at him. Why did you want me in here? She asked softly. He blushed, looking at his feet. Because I'm lonely, and I wanted someone to watch TV with, he admitted softly. You can go if you need to, I just think you're nice. He smiled at her. She smiled at him in return, cupping his face in her hands. I'll stay, she said softly, texting her boss to say she was done for the day. Izuku smiled. Uravity was always taking sponsorships, which he knew meant that money was important, but she was choosing to stay here with him and not go back to work. Surely that meant she liked him, right? He considered kissing her, but he was too scared, so he just looked at her face for a long moment before looking at the TV and trying to act like he was actually watching his TV and not just thinking about how badly he wanted to kiss this girl he had just met. She took his hand and he nearly melted, biting his lip as he stole glances at her, hoping he wasn't making her uncomfortable. He had never done this before. He swore she was blushing, but she also wore pink stuff on her cheeks. He wasn't thinking, even a little, when he brushed her hair away and kissed one of them. She tensed up, and for a second he thought she might hit him, but she turned her head and her entire face turned pink, staring at him and biting her lip. Maybe she was too polite? She looked at the ground, giggling before she looked at his eyes and licked her lips. What was she doing? What was he doing? His lips pressed against hers gently. He was hot all over, especially his cheeks. It felt so weird, so nice. He gasped softly against his lips as he felt her pull him closer. He wrapped his arms around her, closing his eyes as he enjoyed his first kiss. They kissed for a long time. They kissed until they couldn't breathe, and Izuku pressed his forehead against hers and panted, smiling like an idiot as he looked up at her eyes. I love you, Uravity, he whispered. You love me, but you don't know my real name? She whispered with a sheepish smile. I like you too, but my name is Achiko, and I am not ready to say that word, she purred, running her fingers through her hair and pulling away from him so she can look at him. I understand. He was embarrassed, beyond embarrassed, but he really did feel like he had fallen in love. He crossed his legs and looked down at his lap, positioning himself away from her as he huffed. Can I see you again? He murmured. I would like that, she said softly, smiling at him as she huffed and ran her fingers through his hair, watching him lean his head into her hand like a cat being petted. He was so touch-starved. For a moment, she considered saying the L word. She kissed his forehead, and then his nose before resting her forehead against his again. I'm also not running away. I'd like to stay, if you're okay with that, she murmured, pecking his lips again, smiling as he initiated another kiss. She held him with a soft giggle. She looked up at his eyes and kissed his forehead. "You're a good kisser," she murmured. "Really?" His face lit up. "I've never kissed anyone before," he said softly. She looked at him and smiled. "Well then, you're a natural," she huffed, running her fingers through his hair. "I love you," he whispered again. 2am. Who do you love? There are manga spoilers here kind of. Deku felt like an idiot as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Achiko. She was an angel, she smelled like flowers and her hugs felt like the first sip of tea in the morning. She was also a pro-hero, so it seemed unlikely that he had a chance with her. She worked for Kaken, and she was friends with Ingenium, maybe even more. He doubted she would want to kiss him when she found out he had a hand in maiming her best friend's big brother. He wanted to get her out of his head, but he didn't think he would be able to. She was the first person to make him feel like a person in a long time, and he couldn't imagine letting her slip away. He was worried she would forget him, worried she already had. She was so amazing, she probably made everyone feel this way. He reached for his phone, grabbing it, and calling the number that had been Kaken's back when they were friends, or whatever their relationship had been. To his surprise, he did get Bakugo's voicemail. "Hey Kaken. I heard you were looking for me. This is Izuku. From middle school. I saw you on the news and Uravity said that you were worried, so I'm fine. I'm doing pretty well actually. So yeah." He had called to ask about Achiko, but he really wasn't sure if he had the nerve. He also doubted the boy who had refused to learn his name in the 14 years they knew each other would know anything he wanted to know about Achiko. So he hung up, staring at the wall. He had her number, but he didn't want to disturb her late at night. He jumped when his phone came to life in his hand, looking down and seeing a picture of Kirby and Achiko's number on the screen. He answered. "Hello? Achiko? Achiko. I've been thinking about you all night and dash." "Oh good, so I didn't wake you?" Achiko scratched the back of her head and looked at the foot of her bed. "I just couldn't sleep," she murmured. He frowned. "Oh no. Why not?" I don't know." She blushed profusely. What was going on? Was this his quirk? Some sort of enchantment? She couldn't quit thinking about him. She wanted to see him again. "Do you feel guilty?" He sighed. She was a pro-hero, and she had spent a lot of her afternoon making out with an under-the-table arms dealer. Achiko sighed. That was the thing. She didn't regret it at all. She really just wanted to hold him again. Talk to him for longer. He sighed. "I've been thinking about you all night." He murmured, but not like I've been thinking about how nice you are and how good you are at giving hugs and kisses. She laughed bashfully, nodding, "I've been thinking of you too." She murmured, "I don't know what to do about it." His eyes lit up. "Really? You've been thinking about me, why?" "I'm not sure." Achiko lied, her eyes resting on her knees as she thought about his lips and his smile. She just wasn't sure what her infatuation with a threat like Deku would do to her career, or what it said about her as a person, but she wasn't sure how much she cared. She knew she needed to get a hold of herself, but she wasn't sure how. It was 2 in the morning, she probably just needed to go to bed. She thought about saying goodnight, but she instead found herself reaching for her coat. "Maybe I should just come over," she murmured. It was an awful idea, but she had already offered now. Deku smiled, nodding his head. "I'll wait by the door," she beamed, getting out of his bed and walking down the hall towards his kitchen. What did girls like? He had no idea what girls liked. He Googled it. He did not have wine or cheese or any of the things listed. He had cookies, candy, ice cream, and carrots. He just sort of stared at his fridge for a while. He could cook. He was getting some noodles down from his cupboard when he heard a knock on his door. Did she live near him? He went to the door and let her in, kissing her forehead and watching her come into his house. He smiled as he sat down on his couch and looked at her. "Are you hungry?" he sighed. "Oh, I'm okay." Achiko smiled at him and sat next to him. He smiled, looking at her for a second before resting his head on her shoulder and nuzzling her neck. She smiled, feeling his hair rub against her neck, and running her hand down his side. She hummed softly as she stared blankly forward. "So you knew Dynamite back in the day," she murmured. Deku sat up, nodding. "Kaken? Yeah, we went to middle school together. He was my friend. I suppose I'm not sure if I was his. Well, when he saw your name on that bomb, he was pretty worried. He didn't think you were capable of building something like that, a weapon of mass destruction. Thought someone had to have forced you to make it? Well, I made it because I wanted to. He felt her pull away, and part of him wanted to go back on what he said, but he shook his head. I'm an arms dealer. I make weapons for money. Looked her in the eyes and sighed, I care about you, Achiko, but I am not going to apologize for what I do for a living. Your bomb was minutes away from hurting a lot of people, she whispered. Yeah? And heroes never hurt anybody, do they? He laughed. How many times have you watched the light fade from someone's eyes, Uravity? The name Himiko Toga mean anything to you? Your end count is much higher than hers, but she was the villain. India dash. Deku saw Achiko begin to cry, and he frowned, slipping his arms around her as she sobbed. How did you know about me and Toga? She whimpered. You and Toga? He whispered. She shook her head, pulling away from him and burying her face in her knees as she sobbed. She had a type, she just wasn't willing to admit it. Look, I am sorry, I had no idea, I just knew dash. I didn't end her, okay? I didn't end her. Achiko was trembling all over. Deku nodded sadly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I loved her. Me too. He sighed, looking at her sadly. You remind me of her. He added, running a hand through her hair. She looked at him sadly, slipping her arms around him. She was making a mistake, but she just wanted to make it for 5 more minutes. Are we going to regret this? She whispered. He sighed, looking down at her and running a hand through her hair. I'm not, he said softly, looking down at her. She was quiet, looking up at him and brushing a hand against his face. He leaned into her hand and smiled softly. She still looked hurt. I'm going to regret hurting you, he murmured. I already do. She looked at him sadly. I don't know if I can do this, she murmured. He frowned. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Please don't leave. I'm not going to leave. Despite her best judgment, she knew she wouldn't be going anywhere. But I think we both know how this ends. Oh. I really don't. How does this end? Because I don't want it to end at all. She looked at him sadly, thinking about Himiko lying next to her. She stared at Deku blankly and shook her head. I'm not going to watch you turn into a husk. Oh. You're not. He grabbed her chin and pulled her gaze to his. He smiled at her. We're both going to get out alive. She looked at him sadly, wishing she believed him before she felt him pull her into a kiss. She smiled softly, kissing him back, wrapping her arms around him and sighing, slumping onto his shoulder and looking at him as he ran his fingers through her hair. Is Deku your real name? She murmured. My name is Izuku. Deku is an insult Kaken had for me. Izuku. She smiled. Hero. Yeah. I don't go by it anymore. It's a nice name, she murmured. You can call me Midoriya if you really don't want to call me Deku anymore. I'm not a hero. She frowned but nodded. You can call me Izuku if you really want to, he said after a second, blushing a bit. She smiled at him and laughed, looking at her knees. My name is Achiko Uraraka, she murmured. That's a nice name. He grabbed her hand and squeezed it. She yawned softly, looking at him and resting her head in his lap. Deku shook his head, grabbing her shoulders and pulling her up to his shoulder. You can go home if you want. She shook her head with another yawn. No, we are hanging out. She smiled at him softly. She also knew she wouldn't be able to sleep if she went home. He smiled at her. You can sleep in my guest room, he murmured. She shook her head. No. We can keep hanging out. He smiled at her, kissing between her eyes. Let's get a blanket. He stood up, going and finding an all-might quilt his mother had made him. He smiled, going and wrapping it around her. She grinned at him. All-might, she murmured. Deku nodded, looking at her with a grin. I liked him a lot as a kid. She smiled softly at him. He was one of my teachers. He was pretty cool. He really liked Mirio Togata. Deku nodded. Yeah. That guy seemed cool enough. Achiko smiled. Did you meet him? She yawned. Yeah, there was this kid we rescued together. He shrugged his shoulders. We can go to bed if you want. He laughed. Oh. Tell me more about the kid you rescued. Tomorrow. He ran his fingers through her hair and kissed her forehead. You have to go be a hero in the morning. He murmured. He wanted to see her hero costume. He could probably improve it, then he could protect her at work. Just stay with me, she murmured. Deku looked at her and nodded once. Maybe we can sleep in my bed together. I mean sleep next to each other in my bed. Achiko nodded her head, looking at the ground with giggle. Okay, she murmured, standing up and waiting for him to stand with her. She grabbed the All Might quilt and slipped it around her shoulders, following him down the hall. He climbed into the bed and watched her climb in beside him. She smiled at him, climbing under the covers and wrapping her arms around him. Deku grinned from ear to ear, kissing her forehead. You have a lot of All Might stuff, slurred. Go to sleep, he whispered. You like All Might? Good night, Achiko. Good night, Izuku. Deku stared at Achiko as she drifted off to sleep against his chest. Silent tears ran down his face as he kissed her head. I love you, Achiko Uraraka. He knew that it would be difficult for them to be together, and that they may not last, but he was going to hold on to her for as long as he could. What you did was just as dark. Deku frowned at 6am, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as he yawned. Achiko had pulled herself out of his arms and was sitting up in the bed. He assumed she needed directions to the bathroom. Before he saw the silhouette looming over his bed, Achiko seemed tense. Deku felt around the wall behind him for the gun he had hidden in the wall, hitting against random boards for the weaker one. He felt the weak point in his wall and was about to break through it to free his weapon before he recognized the man looming over his bed from the news. Kaken, he groaned. Why? Why are all of you dash? Shut up. Bakugo turned on the light and rolled his eyes. Hello, Uravity, he said. Get the F out. Oh. Kaken. You can't boss her around, you're not at work, dash. But Achiko was climbing out of bed and walking out the door. Bakugo frowned. She was wearing pajamas that seemed to be her own. How long have you been seeing her? I met her this morning. We really hit it off. Bakugo frowned. He wasn't sure what to think. What the hell is going on, Izuku? What do you mean? What is going on? Are you in danger? Oh. I am just an arms dealer. I don't buy it. The kid I knew, dash. The kid you knew threw himself from a roof after his notebook? Deku said dryly. Bakugo glared at him. You want to talk about middle school? Well, I'm sorry, I really am. The things I did were awful, but Deku, what you are doing, dash, is selling weapons. I don't use them. I just distribute them. What the people who get weapons do with them is on them. My hands are clean. You can't possibly believe that, the kid I dash. Shut the F up. Don't you dare act like you know me. The kid you knew was told 114 times that he couldn't be a hero. And when he tried to help people anyways, he damn near effing starved. So yeah, shit has changed. I'm terribly sorry to have disappointed you. Bakugo stared at him blankly. So you started hurting people for a profit? I haven't hurt anyone. I have designed weapons and sold them to the highest bidder. Actually, Kaken, I think your end count is higher than mine. Deku smirked. Do I need to remind you? How many people were in that building? Hundreds? Thousands? Oh no. That's right, hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands dead because of a lack of foresight on the end of the number one hero. I must say, Kaken, I always knew you were volatile. Really, it was just a matter of time, dash. Deku tasted blood. As Bakugo's fist met his nose, he supposed he deserved that. He looked at his crimson hand and sighed with mild annoyance. Phew. Bakugo's voice was cold. I am not going to stand here and argue about morality with you. I came here to make sure no one had hurt you or Uravity, and to try to help the kid he had hurt so long ago. Bakugo didn't know what to do. He felt dizzy, seasick, somehow. What happened to the little boy who loved superheroes? The ray of sunshine who he had envied so much? How could he possibly be swallowed by the darkness so completely? What was Bakugo's part in it? Had he fed Deku to the wolves? No. Bakugo had just clipped his wings and left him there for the wolves. Deku huffed, get out of my house. Stay away from my FING employee. Deku laughed and shook his head, pushing past him. He was a bit surprised when Bakugo made no attempt to stop him. He just sighed and started to make his way towards the door. He had expected Kaken to fight him more. He had never seen him take defeat so quickly. He would be doubling his security measures over the weekend. He went out to his kitchen where he saw Achiko. Hey! She murmured, "Is everything okay?" She murmured. He nodded. He really wanted to kiss her, but he stopped himself, staring at her as he put his hands in his pockets. He didn't want to kick her out of his house, but it was hard enough for him to think right now without her making him think about a future that wasn't possible. Achiko sighed. "Are you sure?" She murmured. "I am. But I do think that you should go." He sighed. He saw the disappointment on her face and felt a pang in his chest. He looked at his feet and huffed. "What time do you have to be to work?" Achiko smiled softly. "I don't have anything I have to do today. You should to go to work. If you don't, Kaken will know you spent the day with me. He will not be happy." Achiko frowned. He had a point. Maybe if she wanted to do this, she would need to start working for Ingenium. She shrugged her shoulders. "Oh well," she murmured. Deku frowned, but he would be lying if he said he didn't feel a bit smug that she would blow Kaken off for him. He sat next to her and rested against her shoulder. "Breakfast?" he sighed. She nodded. "Yeah." "Ugh. What do you want to eat? We can make pancakes." Deku smiled at her and looked at her. "Do you want pancakes?" She nodded. "Pancakes?" Deku grinned, leaning against her for just a moment longer before standing up and getting the ingredients out. "What kind of pancakes?" he asked softly. Achiko sighed softly. "You said last night that you saved a girl with Mirio Togata." "I did." Deku nodded his head once. "You said you would tell me more about it today. Do you mind?" "I'm sorry, but my head is still reeling from this morning, and I would rather not talk about high school with you." There was something frantic about the way he spoke. Achiko nodded once. She wondered what had happened, but she knew better than to ask him. She was quiet as she watched the wheels in his head turn. "I love you, Izuku," for words, an attempt to break through the fog. She doubted it would work. She felt a stirring in her stomach as she put her hands in her pockets and sighed. She wasn't sure if she meant it. It seemed unlikely she loved him after only one date, but she hated seeing him like this. Some of the life returned to Deku's eyes as they wandered to hers. He meant to say it back, but his words turned to ash in his mouth. He didn't deserve this. Any of it. He felt tears coming to his eyes, swearing under his breath as he sat on his kitchen floor and buried his head in his hands. He had wanted to help people, he had, but things had gotten so complicated he wasn't sure where he had lost himself, which bundle of cash was the one where his heart froze over. He wasn't sure what he had done. Achiko frowned, standing up and running to sit on the floor with him. Deku sighed, holding her in his arms. He cried into her shoulders silently. He wanted to get better, but he couldn't bring the people back to life. He couldn't get the weapons back from all of his customers. There was nothing he could do. His arms wrapped tightly around her, like if he loosened his grip, she would leave just like everyone else. She stayed close. She was a little bit scared, but she made no move to pull away. Deku let go after a moment, staring up at Kaken. "Why, you're still here?" "I'm still here." Bakugo laughed and shook his head. He was pissed at both of them. He knew he couldn't fire Achiko, any more than he could kick Deku's teeth in right here and now. No matter how badly he wanted to. "You two deserve each other," he huffed, looking at Achiko. "To think, I thought you were smart." He looked at Deku and shook his head with a sigh. "Have fun. I assume you still have that FNG cold, Uravity? Take the week off. I don't want to see you right now." Deku wondered what Bakugo had been doing upstairs all this time. He was going to have to look at everything closely. "You can't talk to her like dash." "Can't I?" Bakugo rolled his eyes. "Don't play the chivalry card with me, Deku. If you've said anything to her like you said to me, then you can go right to hell." Deku felt Achiko pull away from him, the toga conversation. Bakugo smirked. "Exactly. Both of you. I have shit to do now," and with that, Bakugo stormed out the door. Achiko sighed. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to chase him out the door, but she knew it was pointless, and she didn't want to leave Deku alone. "Are you okay?" Deku whispered. "I mean, if he was going to fire me, he would have," she sighed. I haven't seen him that upset since that building went down," she murmured. Deku frowned. He was upset? Of course he was upset. But everyone who died was a criminal. They were still people who deserved to live. Even if they needed to be incarcerated. Deku frowned. He hadn't thought the lives of criminals mattered to heroes. He needed to call Kaken, but he knew that he wouldn't pick up. Achiko pulled herself out of Deku's arms, and Deku wrapped his arms around his knees and felt an impending sense of doom run down his spine. He had been wrong, so very, very wrong, and he had no way to make things right. He looked at Achiko sadly, unsure what to do. He held his arms out for her and slipped his arms around her, resting his head on top of hers as he stared blankly at the wall. Deku didn't think there was anything that would make him feel better. He felt her breathing against him, he heard her humming something and he began to sway. He loved her. They had known each other for a day, and already he couldn't imagine life without her. Deku looked at her eyes, staring for a long moment before pecking her lips. She smiled at him with a sigh, unsure what to say or do. "Is there anything I can do?" she whispered. Deku looked at her and sighed. He needed to change, but he didn't know how. His brain was fuzzy, he was having a hard time thinking about anything but the woman sitting in his lap. It was why he had asked her to leave, but after what had just happened, he couldn't make her ask him to leave. Again. His grip on her tightened, and his lips pressed to hers. He kissed her gently, holding her tight. She was consuming about 70% of his thoughts. She might as well consume all of them. She kissed him back. Deku's hands ran through her hair as she wrapped her legs around him. She pulled away after a while. Deku scanned her up and down. She blushed, looking at him with a soft sigh. "What?" she said softly. Deku shrugged his shoulders, kissing her forehead before moving to stand up. Achiko nodded, climbing out of his lap and standing up with him. Deku blushed, turning to face the stove. "Pancakes?" Achiko nodded. "Pancakes? My ghosts are gaining on me, pancakes." Deku was quiet as he held Achiko in his arms. His hands ran down her back as she nuzzled his cheek. Her hair was so soft, and it smelled like cherry blossoms. He thought he would be happy the first time they slept together, but he really just felt guilty. He looked at her eyes and smiled weakly, wondering how she felt. "Are you still hungry?" he asked softly. They had abandoned the idea of pancakes after their make-out session had distracted them a bit too much. "No," she murmured. What was wrong with her? She had just slept with a man who she had known for a day. She had told him she loved him and slept with him. On top of him being a stranger, what she did know about him was scary. His weapons had nearly ended or maimed her several times. But he seemed so sweet, and he had such a gentle touch. She loved the way he leaned into her touch, his messy hair, his freckles. She really did think she might love him. She leaned forward as she kissed his nose and sighed. "What now?" she whispered. Deku looked at her with a sigh, kissing between her eyes as he stared at her. She was so warm in his arms, she fit in them perfectly. He didn't want her to slip away, like the last girl he had held like this. His eyes were teary as he ran his fingers through her hair. Was this a betrayal? "What's wrong?" Her voice was soft. She was scared that something she had done had made him realize he didn't like her, that he was about to ask her to leave, that she would never see him again. "Nothing, just the last person I held like this is dead," he murmured. Achiko looked at him sadly. "I'm sorry to hear that." She murmured. "Yeah. It sucked actually. She took my virginity and in the morning she put her clothes back on and said there was someone else. Saw she had died a couple months later." Achiko gasped, beginning to cry herself. "Hime koken?" Deku nodded. "Yeah. I'm so sorry Deku I dash. Oh. Now that I've met you, I understand." She was right. There was someone better. I didn't end her. I didn't mean to. I was dying and she started to sob. Deku shushed her, kissing between her eyes and shaking his head. "I love you," he whispered, "and it's nice to know that she died on her terms, and that she died saving someone who was worth something." She sat up, holding her head in her hands. She sat up beside her and grabbed him and kissed her cheek. "I love you," he murmured. "She's been dead 10 years now." "I know." Her voice was soft. Deku's arms slipped around her as he held her head against his chest. "I think we should get dressed." He sighed, looking at her with a sad smile. He gently kissed her forehead and climbed out of the bed. He put his clothes on before sitting on the foot of the bed. Achiko got dressed too, looking at him and putting her hands in her pockets. Deku smiled at her, walking to her and kissing her gently. "I am going to make you pancakes," he sighed, kissing her cheek and nuzzling her. Achiko grinned. Okay, she murmured, running a hand through his hair. Deku hugged her close and kissed her head again. I love you, he sighed. I think. I love you too, Izuku, she murmured. Deku nodded once, kissing her head one more time before pulling away and leading her out the door of his room and to his kitchen. I never thought I would F an arms dealer on an all-might quilt, Achiko said with a soft giggle. Deku sighed, looking back at her with a frown. Well, you did. So what does that say about you? Achiko frowned. That I love a nerd. She cocked her head to the side. Deku beamed. He was always so defensive, but Achiko hadn't made fun of him yet, and I love a pro hero. We're both learning about ourselves today. He wrapped his arms around her and kissed her forehead. You knew Mirio though? That's really cool. I met him a few times, really thought he would be number one day, but he dashed, she sighed. Deku nodded. Yeah. He helped me save this little girl. Oh yeah. You told me you would tell me about that today. Deku sighed. There were these new bullets circulating. They took quirks away. I was pretty excited about it, personally. I went to this guy and wanted to tell him how cool they were. But then I saw he was using a child's body to make them. Cutting her up. I was mortified. He mentioned a kid who had been breathing down his neck. I figured out who it was after asking around and gave Mirio a call. Gave him some gadgets, and after he told me he had secured the child, I went in and took care of the sick F who was torturing a child. Deku shrugged his shoulders. Achiko nodded. No one knew what happened to him, but no one was super upset about it either, she murmured. Deku smiled at her weakly, looking at his feet. He had been pretty upset the day he heard Mirio had died. He had been so young, it hadn't made sense. He went to the stove, looking at the pancake batter, swiping his finger through the batter and tasting it. It had been sitting out all morning, but he was going to make Achiko pancakes. He smiled at her, getting a pan and some butter before beginning to cook. Deku saw the last decade of his life flash before his eyes. What a brave warrior he had become, fighting his enemy made of straw. He had spent so much of his life thinking pro-heroes didn't care about anyone. That all the good ones died young, like Lemillion, like All Might. But he couldn't have been more wrong, but with thousands of deaths lying at his door, he was terrified to open it. He felt Achiko's arms around him as he made the food. He leaned against her gently, closing his eyes and sighing. Achiko smiled, standing on her toes and kissing his cheek. Deku turned around and kissed her in return. He flipped the pancake and watched her climb up onto the counter and smiled, kissing him softly. You're going to make me burn them? He sighed, kissing her and looking at his feet. He knew he needed to spend time alone, thinking about what all of this meant, but he didn't want to. That would be a lot of work, a lot of guilt, a lot of risk. He knew if he wanted to keep her, and what was left of his soul, he would need to think seriously about redemption. He wasn't sure how he could do it. He was worried it wasn't possible. It had to be possible. He glanced at her as he took a pancake off the burner and started to make another one. She was just watching him. He wondered what she was thinking about. He wondered when she was going to go home, afraid of what would happen when he was alone with his thoughts. He wanted to get better, but he was so deep in the hole, a step in the opposite direction could get him ended. He looked at Achiko and flashed her a smile. She smiled back at him and sighed. Achiko watched him, head cocked to the side. Not only was she sleeping with the enemy, she was waking up next to the enemy, telling them they love them and letting them make her breakfast. She smiled at him. Deku just really didn't seem like the enemy. He was sweet and cute, and he just seemed so lonely, and she was lonely too. He finished making breakfast and set it on the table, watching her sit next to him and grinning as he ran a hand through her hair. He ran a hand through his hair as he looked at his knees. So, you have a week off? Achiko looked at him awkwardly. Apparently she murmured. You going to stay here or? He sighed, not to say, if you did that would be great. But if you can't, I understand. Achiko sighed, looking at him and then at her feet. I don't know, Deku. I mean, I have one set of pajamas, she murmured, but she also was a little bit scared of being seen leaving by one of Deku's clients. She looked at her feet. Also, we did meet yesterday. A whole week together seems like a bit much, doesn't it? Deku looked disappointed, but he nodded. Okay, he murmured. Achiko frowned. What's wrong? Nothing. Nothing, you're right, he sighed. Achiko frowned, looking at him for a little bit longer. Once you leave I have to think about making some serious changes and some of the things I have done these past few years. And I don't want to do that. Achiko frowned. Maybe I can help you? She murmured. And if you tell Dynamite you are thinking about redemption maybe dash? Deku shook his head. I'm not ready to approach Kaken about it, he sighed. Achiko nodded. Well, we can talk about it, she murmured. I just don't want to be alone. He whimpered. Achiko sighed and nodded her head. She had no idea what she was doing. She really thought his quirk had to be whatever the F he was doing to her head. You don't have to be, she sighed. I'll stay. Deku smiled, slipping his arms around her and kissing her softly. Thank you. I love you, he whimpered. But Deku, I do expect to have some difficult conversations this week, she murmured. Deku nodded his head, looking at her as his arms stayed around her. What would you say dash? She hesitated. She didn't want to know. What was the worst thing you ever did? Deku hesitated, moving to kiss Achiko, who put her hand over her lips. After you answer, she murmured. You know, I would love to look at your suit. Upgraded. I noticed it doesn't seem very dash. Deku. I just need to know how bad it is. There's nothing you can say that will change how I feel. Her voice was gentle. She was terrified of the words that had just left her lips. She was especially frightened of how much she believed them. His eyes rested on hers. He wanted to scream. I don't know, Achiko, he sighed. I have sold so many weapons, and I would be lying if I said I knew exactly which atrocities have happened because of my weapons. He was lying. He knew which crime he had committed that would most upset her, but it was a lie that he thought she might believe. A lie that would buy him more time. He couldn't be alone again. Achiko sighed, nodding her head. So you just sold weapons? That's it? That's it, he sighed, smiling at her sadly. She looked at him and nodded her head once, breathing a sigh of relief. She kissed him gently. He smiled, pulling her into his lap and kissing her back. Hey! He smiled at her softly, rubbing her back. That's not fair. Don't create another detour from your pancakes. It took me all day to make them. Achiko smiled at him softly, kissing his forehead before sitting at the table to eat her breakfast at 2 in the afternoon. Please don't be in love with someone else. Deku smiled as he watched Achiko eat pancakes. He ran a hand down her back and sighed. Should we go get you clothes after you're finished? He kissed her head. She nodded her head as she looked up at him and sighed. That would be nice. She was worried about being seen in public with him, though she supposed it was going to happen at some point, especially if he was going to try and redeem himself. Don't worry, I'm good at hiding from the public, she said. She nodded, kissing her gently. She nuzzled him. I wasn't worried. She purred. Deku grinned, holding her close and kissing her forehead. So we don't have to hide? We don't have to hide. Deku wiped his eyes, pulling Achiko into a passionate kiss, holding her tightly against himself as he buried his face in her shoulder. Achiko laughed. I thought I was to eat my pancakes with no distractions. I'm sorry You made me really happy, he murmured, kissing her forehead before she began to eat again. Deku smiled as he watched her eat, standing up and going out to start his car. Achiko sighed, finishing her pancakes and starting on the dishes. Deku hugged her from behind, kissing her cheek gently. I can do those. No, you made breakfast. I'll clean up. Deku smiled softly and nuzzled her. He stepped away and started to wipe off the counters. Achiko finished with dishes, putting her hands in her pockets as she looked at him. Ready to go? Deku nodded, pecking her lips as she held his hand and led him out the door. He opened car door for her. She climbed in beside him and giggled. Does this look like the Batmobile on purpose? Deku laughed with a nod. I'm offended you had to ask. He kissed her cheek before beginning to drive it. Achiko was a bit nervous. She wasn't sure why she thought he would have a normal car. People would definitely see her riding in this. She supposed Deku wasn't a public figure. People would just wonder who the skinny green-haired man in the All Might hoodie was. But then she remembered the #1 hero was looking for a green-haired man with freckles. She wanted to be scared, but really she was having fun. She giggled, looking out the window. They would raise eyebrows, but that didn't matter to her right now. She gave instructions to his apartment. She smiled when he pulled into the parking lot of her apartment building, kissing his forehead as she stepped out of the car. Deku frowned. She was a pro hero, and he was sure Kaken paid her well. Why was she living in a dump like this? He stepped through the door and held his breath as the smell of mildew hit his nose. He looked around the building. It did not seem structurally sound. He felt himself growing protective. He wasn't about to lose another loved one. She sighed. No judging, I know my place isn't as nice as yours. Deku laughed. You're a pro hero. Why do you live like this? Achiko nodded, leading him up to her apartment. It was a studio, smaller than a single room in Deku's home. Huh, he said, putting his hands in his pockets. It's nice. A little cold in the winter, but I'm really not home that often, so it seemed pretty pointless to pay a lot in rent. That's fair. Deku frowned, putting his hands in his pockets. You know. We could probably just get all of your stuff and take it to my apartment. You don't have a lot of things. Achiko blushed. Are you asking me to move in? Yes. Deku sighed, because I don't want this ceiling to fall on you. He looked around the apartment. Frankly, I'm a little scared just standing in here. Achiko frowned. You said you weren't going to judge. And I've known you for a day, Deku. I'm not moving in with you. You said it yourself. You're not home a lot. Deku sighed. Come on, just move in with me. You're a pro hero, so I know you have a pretty big bank account for if things go south to get another death trap like this, and a lot of friends to kick my quirkless ass if I try to trap you. Achiko sighed. She nodded her head. I really don't think you're quirkless. I think your quirk is persuasion. Deku sighed. Nope. I have a joint in my pinky toe. Quirkless? What? There's a thing about your pinky toe having a joint and having a quirk. I have a joint, so I don't have a quirk. Achiko sighed. Then why dash? You just have a thing for me. Deku sighed. I'm not sure why either. He smiled at her, kissing between her eyes. Achiko packed up her stuff and sighed. Deku sighed. Seriously? I think my bedroom is bigger than your apartment. Achiko sighed. I get it. I just don't like spending money unnecessarily. She murmured. I'm very used to saving every dime I can. Deku frowned. I'm not making fun of you. He murmured. I'm just asking you to let me help you live comfortably. Because I sleep better next to you, and I don't want you to die in this place. Achiko frowned, but she nodded, kissing him gently as she packed up her things and put them in his car. He kissed her gently and sighed. What now? He murmured, cocking his head to the side as he looked at her. Back to your place, I guess? Achiko sighed. Our place? Deku murmured, kissing her hand. Achiko blushed, but she nodded, kissing him as she climbed into the car next to him. Deku grabbed her hand as she drove her back to his place. Deku looked at Achiko with a sigh. Did we get everything? Achiko nodded her head. Yeah. Deku sighed. It shouldn't be possible to fit all of her stuff in his car on one trip. How did you live with so little? I spent a lot of time at friends' houses. Ingenium? Yeah. I saw you guys on the news together quite a bit. He's my best friend. Deku's heart skipped a beat as he looked at his feet. Don't be like that. He's just a friend. Sure, they had dated in the past, but that was ages ago. She grabbed Deku's chin, giving him a reassuring smile before kissing him gently. Deku sighed. He wished that was the reason her connection to Ingenium made him nervous. He sighed, smiling softly at him as she put her hands in her pockets. Deku was sitting on his couch, looking for something to watch when her phone began to ring. Oi, it's Ida. She sighed. You mind if I take it? Deku shook his head. By all means. He frowned as he watched her go into the other room, wondering what they were talking about, resisting his urge to use his security system to listen. Uraraka, what is this I'm hearing about you being spotted in a black car with a young man who fits Katsuki Bakugo's description of the man whose weapons have been terrorizing us for years? That's my new boyfriend, Izuku. Bakugo said that was Deku's name. Achiko sighed. Are you calling me to berate me? Achiko sighed. Ida frowned. I'm calling you to see if you are a hostage, and I'm still not sure. Oh. This is where I live now. Uraraka. I saw you a week ago, and you said you were single, and I do not believe you were lying to spare my feelings. I met him yesterday, but moving in just made sense. Ida sighed. That did make some sense. She had pretty much lived with him when they were an item. Hell, she had pretty much lived with him since high school. Not that he was complaining, he was actually going to miss her. Can I come over and check on you? For my peace of mind? Achiko sighed, looking at her feet. Why don't we get dinner tonight? I just don't want to blindside Deku with another surprise visitor. Ida sighed, so it definitely was the villain he was worried about. Sure. Where do you want to go? I'll go ask Deku. Deku, where do you want to go to dinner to meet Tenya? Deku groaned, burying his face in his hands. There's a place a block from here. If Ida tried to end him, he could get away quickly. Achiko nodded. I know the place, she smiled. She told Tenya, who nodded. Alright. I will see you two at 5. Achiko smiled. We'll see you at 5. Bye Tenya. Goodbye Uraraka. Deku sighed, kissing her gently. I wasn't expecting to meet Ingenium tonight. There have been a lot of surprise visitors here the past couple days. Achiko sighed. He's worried your mind controlling me or that I have Stockholm Syndrome or something. If I didn't say we would meet him tonight, he would be here right now. Deku nodded. He huffed, hugging her gently and kissing between her eyes. How long did you guys see each other? A few years. We were engaged. Engaged? You were going to marry Ingenium? Yeah. What stopped you? Achiko shrugged. He wanted lots of kids right away. Being with him also meant a lot of stuffy parties I didn't like to attend. Too much went into being Mrs. Ida. Deku frowned. He was very nervous, and he didn't know what to do. Achiko slipped her arms around him and sighed. Everything is going to be fine. We love each other, but platonically. His opinion matters to you. It does? Achiko nodded, though she couldn't imagine there was anything that she could hear that would make her want him less. He pulled her into his lap and just held her tight against his chest, running his hands up and down her back. Achiko hugged him tight. I can't be alone again, he sighed. You aren't going to lose me, she whispered. This relationship has been 2 days, you were with him for 3 years. He's not going to take me from you. Achiko sighed. Deku held her tight, not unless Ida had detailed memory of the night his brother was maimed. Achiko looked at his eyes, kissing him gently as he rubbed her back. What do I need to wear to the restaurant you picked? Deku sighed. Whatever you want. Doesn't have a dress code. She nodded, kissing his nose. I love you, she sighed, standing up and going to change her clothes. Deku smiled when he saw her in a short pink dress with long sleeves and white go-go boots. You're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, he sighed, kissing her gently before going to change his clothes too. Achiko put on some makeup, smiling when she saw Deku in a dark green button-up and black pants. She grinned at him, slipping her arms around him and kissing him gently. You look amazing, she murmured. He grinned, kissing her softly, holding her gently against him. This is going to be our first date. And pro-hero Ingenium. Deku rolled his eyes. Achiko giggled softly, pecking his lips. It's going to be awesome. Why they lost their minds and fought the wars. Deku held Achiko's hand tight as he drove to the restaurant he had chosen to go to with Achiko and her ex-boyfriend. He smiled at her, glancing at her face. She had such a big smile on her face. He wondered if she was thinking about Ingenium. He was sure Ingenium was 1,000 times cooler than him. She looked at him and wrinkled her nose, sighing as she moved her hand to run her fingers through his hair. He smiled, leaning into her hand as he parked in front of the restaurant. Achiko sighed, getting out of the car. Deku got out, going around and slipping an arm around her side, pulling her close and walking inside with her. He sighed, eyes scanning the room for Ingenium, assuming he would be in the center of the room telling a story about something badass he did. Maybe he's running a little late. Actually, you are 5 minutes late. Deku frowned, turning around and sighing when he saw a tall man in a gray tuxedo with a pink pocket hanky and sakura boutonniere. Deku frowned, wondering if this was Ingenium's bodyguard or something. Did pro-heroes have those? Look, I'm sorry. We got held up in the car, but is he still here? What do you mean? Tenya, Achiko wrapped her arms around her friend and grinned. Uraraka. He hugged her back, looking at Deku who seemed to withdraw. This was Ingenium? What was he wearing? Deku's fist clenched at his side as he watched them exchange pleasantries. He was trying not to, but he couldn't help but feel a bit insecure. He grinned when Achiko nodded towards him. This is my boyfriend Izuku. Ah yes, Izuku Midoriya. Ida held his hand out and Deku shook it awkwardly. Deku sighed. He could see in Ida's eyes that he didn't approve. Ingenium, I'm a big fan. Is your suit the same as your brother's? Deku smiled when he saw Ida's eyes light up. Similar, yes, but enhancements were made by a friend. Deku nodded. You think I could pick your brain about it sometime? I'm a huge fan of tech. Ida nodded perhaps, yes, he sighed, glancing at Ochako before gesturing towards their table. Deku smiled as he grabbed Ochiko's side again and went to sit next to her. He felt himself beginning to relax as Ochiko's fingers intertwined with his under the table. He gazed at her, a gentle huff escaping his lips as he rested his head on his hand. She was talking to Ingenium, he had no idea what they were talking about, he just knew he was in her presence, and it was so warm. What are you wearing? Ochako asked Ida with a playful smile. It looks like the suit you wore to prom. It is that very suit. Why? I thought, if Midoriya was using some sort of mind control. Perhaps if I wore this suit, it would help bring you back. Ochako giggled, looking at her shoes and shaking her head. Why would the suit you wore to prom help with mind control? Good memories, at least for me. Ochako frowned, looking at the table as she shook her head. For me too, she murmured, unsure of what else to say. Deku sighed, rolling his eyes. Mind control? I'm lonely but I'm not a monster. Ochako nodded, taking her hand out of his before running it through his hair. Deku's expression softened, but he still looked unhappy. I'm also not that pathetic. Deku sighed. He wanted to leave, he wanted to go home with Ochako, but he knew he had to do this first. And my mind control gadgets were too powerful, so I never used them, let anyone use them. If I was using mind control, Ochako wouldn't be in this restaurant talking to you. Ochako looked at him with a frown, he could see her withdrawing from him, and it hurt. He sighed, looking at his hands. I'm not a monster, I would never take anyone's autonomy away from them, especially not someone I care about as much as I care about Ochako. He saw Ingenium's disapproval and he couldn't blame him. He looked at his lap again before standing up and shaking his head. I'm going to the bathroom, he sighed, storming off towards the restroom. Ochako frowned, watching him leave, before getting up and following him. What are you doing? She sighed. He thinks I'm a monster. How could someone like you like someone like me unless I drugged her tea? Deku sighed, staring at her sadly. Ochako sighed, looking at her feet. He's worried. Deku, it's not like me to move this quickly with someone. And since I was with him for 3 years, it probably upsets him. I'm moving quicker with you than I did with him, and the fact that you are a villain certainly doesn't help. Deku sighed, rolling his eyes. It still sucks? I'm sorry. She sighed. I don't know what to do. Deku huffed, shaking his head before pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You have mind control tech? Ochako murmured. I never used it, I was scared of what someone might do with it, so I destroyed it before anyone could touch it, he sighed. But you did create mind control tech? Yes. I created it and immediately destroyed it. Deku raised his voice, he was beginning to get angry. Ochako frowned, but nodded. She put her hands in her pockets. Deku sighed, shaking his head. I know it was wrong. It never saw the light of day, I swear. Ochako frowned, looking at his eyes. She felt like she was being mind-controlled. She wasn't acting like herself lately at all, but she also really didn't think he had an opportunity to do that to her, and he seemed so sweet. She assumed this was how a woman in love acted, but did that mean that she never really loved Tenya? That was sad. So what was it about Deku that made her insane? Deku saw her thinking and he shook his head, turning around one sentence from her ex, and she thought he was a monster, just like everyone else. I'm just going to go. You can stay with Ingenium, Deku frowned when she grabbed his arm. Please don't go. Deku tensed, staring at her with confusion that shifted into adoration. He grabbed her face and kissed her nose and then her cheek and then her lips and then her neck. Deku, you cannot keep trying to distract me from going back to see him. We're going to have to go back there at some point. Deku nodded, standing up straight and huffing. Fine. What did you think was going to happen? I don't know. I wanted to kiss you. Did you think we were going to make out in the bathroom of this restaurant? Deku blushed, maybe he sighed. Ochako giggled with a shake of her head. I love you, she murmured, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. Deku smiled into it, pulling her against him and kissing her back. Ochako broke it after a long moment. Tenya is going to be worried. I don't care. Deku said breathlessly, kissing her forehead, but we can go back if you want. He grabbed her but gently with soft smile. Deku, where your hand is right now is enough to destroy my reputation. I cannot be caught in a bathroom with a villain while my ex sits and waits for us to come back to him. Deku nodded. I was not suggesting we go to the bathroom, he purred with a smirk. Get your mind out of the gutter. Achiko laughed. What do you want? Honestly? I want to take you into the bathroom, but you have already told me no. Achiko bit her lip. Was she really considering this? She glanced at the bathroom and huffed. She couldn't. It was an awful idea. She would be in so much trouble. Deku looked at her with a sigh, kissing her softly, holding her close. It's a bad idea. He kissed her cheek. Let's go back to your friend. Achiko nodded. Deku sighed. We could be quick. Let's be quick. Achiko felt guilty as she tried to make her hair look normal again, with her fingers. Do you think Ida knows what we did? She murmured. Deku sighed. No. He probably thinks we left, or we're back here fighting, he murmured, zipping his pants as she grabbed his hand to lead him out of the bathroom. Her reputation was demolished. She would probably be fired in the morning. She wasn't sure what she was doing or what she was thinking. This was all so out of character for her. Deku had an arm around her. He kissed her head gently before sitting across from Ida. He felt much better about all of this now. Ida could think whatever he wanted. Achiko knew he wasn't doing anything nefarious. Are you two okay? Tenya sighed. I was beginning to worry you had left. I knew Achiko wouldn't do that though, not without a phone call. Achiko blushed, looking guilty. Ida had no idea what she was capable of doing. Deku nodded. We needed to talk, he sighed. Alone? Ida nodded. Fair enough. I apologize for offending you, Midoriya. I only meant, I had no idea what to expect from this encounter. I was worried about my friend. Deku nodded, squeezing Achiko's hand gently. Well, there's nothing to worry about. I would never hurt her. Achiko smiled weakly, nuzzling his side. Deku grinned, running his hand down her side. So, what do you guys want to eat? Deku sighed. I'm just going to get ramen, and maybe a drink. Achiko nodded. I'll split it with you. Deku hesitated. I haven't eaten all day. I'll buy you your own. He would have split it with her, but he had a great deal of cardiovascular activity that day. Achiko nodded, kissing his cheek gently. Ida smiled at them and sighed. You can share my soup with me if you want. Achiko shook her head with a sigh. I want ramen, she murmured. Ida nodded. Fair enough. He smiled as he picked at his food. So, Midoriya, now that you're seeing Achiko, and you seem serious about this, what are you going to do about your reputation? I don't know, Ingenium, what do I need to do about my reputation? I don't know, maybe start dressing nicer, shower more and wear a suit. I don't know. I think that would make me look like more of a villain. You could come out of the shadows, make weapons on the right side of the law. Achiko nodded. You could stop dealing with villains, and make them for heroes instead. You said you wanted to work on my suit. We could start there, and maybe Bakugo would let you sell them to him too. Deku nodded with a soft sigh. He didn't want to ask Kaken for help, but it didn't sound like he had a choice. Ida nodded. Yes, Bakugo could help a great deal. He looked at Deku and Achiko with a sigh. He didn't like this at all, but Achiko was smart, and he trusted her judgment, but he would stay close to ensure nothing happened to her. Got lovesick all over my bed. Deku sighed, trying to focus on her head on his shoulder, her hand on his knee, the soft snores escaping her lips. How could something demand more of his attention than her? His hand ran down her side, a soft smile on his lips as he thought about how he was going to apologize to Kaken, and scarier still, ask for his help. He heard Tenya clear his throat and his mind snapped back to dinner. That's Uraraka for you. Every time she eats a big dinner, she falls asleep. Deku smiled softly. Good to know. He looked over at her and grinned. Tenya smiled in return with a nod of his head. It was hard to believe the man sitting across from him was responsible for such turmoil. He was so small, and he was so kind to Achiko, so gentle. He seemed like a fine person. Deku sighed softly, staring at Achiko for a long moment. Do you want me to carry her to your car? Ida murmured. I've done it many times. Deku nodded. Why? That would be great, thanks. He was thinking about trying to do it himself, but he knew he couldn't. He kissed her gently before sighing as Ida lifted her bridal style into his arms and followed Deku out to his car. Ida frowned as he gave the car a once-over. May wanted to make a car very similar to this one. She asked me for funds. Deku nodded, the Batmobile. I used to really like Batman. Well, it would seem you have something in common with the girl I am speaking to. Deku smiled. You're speaking to someone? Not super seriously, but yes. Deku grinned. Good for you, Ingenium. Tenya. Ida replied. Deku nodded. Tenya? Deku sighed softly, looking at Achiko, sleeping in his car. He hoped he was looking at his future. He would do anything to get to keep her in his life. She said, I'm going to get her to bed. Deku murmured, smiling. Ida sighed. Of course. It's been a pleasure, Midoriya. Pleasure's all mine. Deku sighed, shaking Ida's hand before slipping into his car and driving back to the house he now shared with her. He looked at her and frowned. He didn't want to wake her, but he definitely could not carry her to their room. He needed to start hitting the gym. He gently shook her. Chaco, he sighed. Chaco? Achiko groaned, opening her eyes and sighing. Sorry, I didn't mean to. It's okay. Let's go to bed. Achiko nodded, climbing out of the car and yawning. Deku sighed, slipping an arm around her and helping her to their room. Almith, she giggled as she climbed under his quilt. Deku smiled at the floor. He'll help me keep you warm tonight? He murmured, watching her climb into the bed and sighing as he curled up with her. She smiled and curled against his chest. Deku gazed at her for a long moment. She was wearing her dress and her boots, but he wasn't going to wake her again. He sat up with a sigh, taking off his shoes and curling back up with her. She wriggled a bit with a whimper. Deku smiled at her, resting his head on top of hers and just holding her. He stared at his wall, knuckles hurting as his eyes passed over a couple of the holes he had punched into his wall over the years. Deku sighed. He was exhausted, but he knew he would be calling Kaken in the morning, and so he wouldn't be getting a wink of sleep tonight. He looked at Achiko's head, pressing a kiss to it and running his fingers through her hair. Somewhere between 3 and 4 am, Deku fell asleep, curled around Achiko. His heart sank when he woke up alone in a button-up and dress pants. He looked around the room. Had Achiko left? He stood up and started running out the door, terrified he had been abandoned. His frown turned upwards when he saw her in the kitchen, trying to figure out how to use his stove. Do you want me to cook for you? He called down from the top of his stairs. Achiko jumped. No, I was going to cook for you. Deku shook his head. I insist. I can't have you breaking my things. Achiko rolled her eyes but nodded, stepping away from the stove. Deku smiled, going down the stairs as he went and stood at the stove. What's for breakfast, sweetie? I was just going to make rice. Rice with what? Just rice. Deku sighed. I'll handle breakfast. He kissed her nose and hugged her. He sighed, realizing there was something she could make without all of his weird appliances. He smiled at her. Do you want to make fruit sandwiches? Achiko nodded. Yeah. Sounds great. Deku nodded, handing her a knife and some fruit, getting his milk toast and whipped cream. Achiko grinned as she started to slice the fruit. Deku hummed softly to himself as put on some tea for them. Achiko grinned, singing the words to the song he was humming. Deku grinned and sang with her as they put their sandwiches together. Achiko smiled as Deku put a dab of whipped cream on her nose, trying to lick it before he kissed it off for her. He sighed, hugging her and kissing her forehead before climbing onto his counter and eating his sandwich while Achiko watched and ate her own on the other counter. Deku laughed at his knees. I have a kitchen table. You're the one who got up on the counter. Achiko replied with a sigh. We're both goblins, aren't we? We might be. Deku got off the counter to give her a kiss. They both ate their sandwiches, giving each other whipped cream-flavored kiss before Deku sighed. I should probably call Kaken, he said with a frown. Achiko nodded, kissing him gently. I'm proud of you, she purred. Deku nodded, kissing her gently before picking up his phone and going back to his bedroom. He was surprised when Bakugo answered his phone. The hell do you want? He snarled. Deku sighed. I wanted to apologize for what I said yesterday. Kaken, I didn't mean it. Bakugo sighed. He had broken into Deku's house at 4 am. Whatever, it's fine. No, it's not. I shouldn't have said anything. I made assumptions about you, and about pro heroes in general, and I was wrong. I was so wrong, Kaken, he sighed, fighting back tears, because Achiko is amazing, and Tenya seems nice, and Lemillion was great, and so I have never had a bad experience with a pro hero. I don't know why I said such a terrible thing to you. Deku. I broke into your house at 4 a.m. and then tried to tell you how to live your life. I was also pretty merciless to you in middle school. I am not angry with you because of what you said yesterday morning. Deku frowned. You're not? I'm not. I can't talk right now. Can we just get lunch or something, Deku? I'm at work. Deku frowned but he nodded. Yeah. Where do you want to go? That place you went with Achiko and Ito would be good. Deku blushed and began to sweat. How did you know about that? Achiko and Ito were seen in the same place again. Kind of stuff gets around, unfortunately. But if you're comfortable eating there, I can stop there around 5. That's not lunchtime. That's when I have time to see you. Deku nodded. Okay. Can I bring Achiko? Bakugo sighed yes. Fine. He wondered what was going on with those two. Achiko had been pretty independent in high school, badass. It was odd to see her seemingly developing a codependency with a man with a pretty awful reputation. He told himself it was Deku, that he wasn't capable of hurting anyone, but that was verifiably false, and he was a little bit worried about Uraraka. If he was doing anything, Ito would have kicked the shit out of him. Deku nodded. Maybe it would be best if he went alone. He didn't want to lean on Achiko too much. He needed to face Kaken himself. He nodded. Okay, I'll see you at 5, Kaken. He sighed as he heard that Kaken had already hung the phone up. He sighed and went back out to the kitchen and frowning as he saw Achiko scrolling on her phone and looking mortified. Deku frowned. What's wrong? Achiko put her phone away, shaking her head. Nothing. How was it? He wants to get dinner with us. Same place as last night. I was thinking I might do this one alone, he sighed. Did he say something about what we did? What? I have been asked by a few of my friends if I actually went into a public bathroom with you last night. Someone got a picture of us last night? Deku frowned. Kaken didn't say anything about that. He just said to meet him there. Achiko nodded, but Deku could see she was spiraling. Hey! He grabbed her chin. What you do is your business. You're a grown woman. It's not that simple. Deku, I have a brand. I can't just do that with villains in bars. Well, you did. Deku shrugged his shoulders. And I'm sorry, but we did that, and we need to figure out what to do about it. Achiko sighed. Start going forward with your redemption. Tell people we're dating. Then it at least seems a bit less scary. People are scared you're doing something to my head. Mind control or something. So fair warning. Deku sighed, wanting to punch his wall. That makes sense. Well, we'll fix it. We'll figure it out after dinner tonight. He kissed her softly. He didn't think there was anything they could do right at that moment. He just wanted to focus on making her feel better. He kissed her gently. He hugged her and nuzzled her cheek. He kissed her again, sighing as he held her. What can I do to make you feel better? Achiko frowned, hugging herself sadly and looking at her feet. All Might blanket, she whimpered. All Might blanket? Deku said with a soft smile, kissing her head before leading her back to his bedroom and watching her climb into his bed and turning on his TV. He handed her the remote and sighed. He rolled his eyes when he got a call from a client, putting his phone on Do Not Disturb. He supposed he could probably still make weapons for Gentle Criminal after his redemption. He texted him that he was spending a day making his girlfriend feel better. Gentle Criminal texted him a thumbs up with the words, "Best of luck." Deku smiled at his phone, thanking him. Before putting his phone up and slipping his arms around Achiko and smiling at her, she smiled back at him and curled against his chest. People are going to think I'm a bad person, she whispered. Deku sighed, shaking his head. Well, you're not. You're the greatest person I've ever met, he murmured, looking at what she had put on the screen and then back at her, kissing her again. I haven't seen this one. That makes sense. There aren't any superheroes in it. Deku rolled his eyes and laughed softly. That's fair. He murmured. Thought I'd have to change the world to make you see me. Deku smiled softly as he held Achiko in his arms. They had been watching Ouran High School Host Club for hours, and Deku was honestly a little bit invested, but he was mostly watching her, the way she smiled, her hands running through his hair. He had been told so many times that love came slow. Then what was this? This all-encompassing feeling that made it impossible for him to remember what life was like before her? He didn't care what anyone said, this was love. To us. His watch went off, and he frowned. It was 5. Kissing her gently, he sighed. I have to go meet Kakin, he murmured, looking at her and hesitating. He wanted her to come. Kakin had said she could come, and he was a little bit worried about her. He shook his head. He needed to do this alone. Achiko nodded her head. I'll bring you back some ramen. Can I have fried rice instead? Yeah. Deku nodded. Whatever you want. He smiled at her before kissing her gently. I love you, Deku. I love you, Achiko. He sighed, kissing her softly as he stood up and went to his car. He frowned as he started it, looking at the passenger's side, feeling like he was forgetting something. He shook his head and sighed. She was in his house, watching her show and eating popcorn. She would be fine for a couple of hours, and so would he. He couldn't use her as a crutch forever. He sighed as he drove to the restaurant he had been at with her the day before. He blushed slightly as he walked past the bathrooms, getting some dirty looks from staff. He supposed he could understand that. I'm here to see Catcha Dynamite. The hostess nodded, leading him to the table where Bakugo was sitting in his hero costume. Hey, have you eaten here before? They have good dash. I already ordered. Haven't eaten all day. Deku nodded. That made sense. Surely there was a day for Kakin to work his meals into his day. Maybe he could figure out how to do it, but he also knew that anything he made would probably annoy Bakugo more than anything. Where's Cheeks? She not want to see me or something? I actually told her I thought I should do this alone. Cheeks? Yeah. It's a nickname. She has round cheeks. Deku nodded. He supposed he didn't have a right to get protective. Kakin had definitely called her that before he met her. Don't make that face. She's a friend. I've known her since my first year of high school. Deku sighed. I'm not trying to make a face. I'm sorry. He looked at his lap. I was hoping to get the chance to apologize. Shouldn't have gotten on her like that. She's a grown woman. She can spend her free time doing what she wants. I sent her to check on you. I should not have yelled at her for being in your house. She can come back to work tomorrow if she wants to. He had given her the rest of the week off. Wouldn't make sense for him to force her to come back to work the following day. Deku nodded. I will tell her, he sighed. Bakugo nodded his head, sighing as he looked at the floor. So, how did we get here, Deku? What do you mean? How did you end up? What happened to you? Like I said, Kakin, rejection letters from every hero school in Japan, and some in other countries too. So I started doing vigilante work, but that didn't pay, and I was hungry. So when people offered to buy my weapons, I jumped at the chance. Because I wanted to eat. Why didn't you say anything? I could have dashed. Bakugo sighed, shaking his head. He knew the answer. Things got worse from there. I spiraled pretty bad. Seeing you win that FING sports festival, seeing you become #1 hero, I started feeling like I needed to prove myself. Prove I was better than you, so I started trying to F with you. Make you mess up. Make you fail. So it was personal. Of course it was personal. Deku replied, I wanted to beat you. It became an obsession. I wanted to be the one to bring you to your FNG knees. Bakugo frowned. It was hard for him to hear, but he knew he needed to listen. What changed? Deku blushed, looking at his knees. I met her, he thought, but he supposed that wasn't true, not entirely. It had started before then. I saw you on the news talking about me, worrying about me. I hadn't seen you in so long. I had this contorted, scary image of you in my head. Seeing you there, you weren't smug, you weren't the way I remembered you at all. I was confused. I began to question things. And then I met Achiko, and she was just the most wonderful person in Tenya, and I realized I had misjudged an entire profession. I spent so long thinking if you were a good pro hero, you died young. But now that I've thought about it, that doesn't make much sense. Bakugo nodded his head. I was awful to you, Deku. I'm sorry. I really am. I have felt bad about it for years. I'm honestly glad you're alive, he sighed. He had spent so much time worried Deku had gotten hurt or ended because of his carelessness. Deku was his brother. Spending so much of his life without him had been hard. You know something stupid? Bakugo sighed. What? When I won that sports festival, I wanted to call you. I have spent so much of my life wanting to call you. But I always assumed you wouldn't pick up, because you hated me. Deku sighed. He had hated Bakugo. But he wondered if he had called him, that first year they were apart, if that would have changed anything. He sighed sadly. I've missed you too, he admitted softly, voice breaking. He wasn't going to let himself cry. What are we going to do? Bakugo asked. A waitress brought him his food, and Deku the same ramen he had gotten the night prior. Deku thanked her and ordered Achiko some fried rice to go. Deku picked at his noodles and watched Bakugo eat pretty quickly. She said, I was going to stop giving weapons to criminals and start trying to turn over a new leaf, make weapons for heroes. I think I could really be an asset. Bakugo nodded. I would need to see some of your work more closely before I could give you a job. What were you thinking? I wanted to start by working on Achiko's suit. You could watch me do that. Bakugo nodded. What do you think it needs? I would like to make it more comfortable, maybe add rocket boots or wings. Angel wings would be fitting. I think. He smiled softly to himself. Bakugo nodded. I haven't looked at it yet, done any research. I don't know what enhancements it needs, I just know that I can improve it. Why is that? Because I haven't worked on it yet? Deku smirked. Bakugo laughed, looking at the ground. Touché, he had finished his meal, but he watched Deku eat with a sigh. What else have you been doing besides trying to ruin me? Honestly, nothing until I met Achiko. I really built my life around revenge. And it was pretty lonely and pretty empty. I'm excited to have some warmth in my life again. Bakugo nodded. You really like her, huh? He laughed. You know, she always reminded me of you. Part of why I sent her to check on you. Deku frowned. Achiko was nothing like him. She was optimistic, kind. She was a ray of sunshine, a literal angel. How could Bakugo say that about Achiko? Bakugo sighed as he looked at his watch. It's been nice, but we should probably start wrapping this up. I've got a date. Deku grinned. Really? Do I know them? Not going to tell you. Bakugo was cautiously optimistic about what was going on with Deku, but he wasn't going to tell him about the people he cared about just yet. Fair enough. Deku sighed, shaking Bakugo's hand and cocking his head to the side. I'm going to go see if Achiko is still wallowing. Did something happen? Deku blushed profusely, and Bakugo no longer had to wonder if the rumors about what had happened in that bathroom were true. Well, I hope you two are careful. She's a great employee. I'm not going to end her. No, but there are things you could damage. He saw Deku's shoulders slump and sighed. Just think before you act. Is all I'm saying. Deku nodded with a sigh. Thanks. Bakugo paid for his lunch, and he thanked him again, grabbing Achiko's food and returning to his house where she was still in bed, watching TV. Deku climbed into bed next to her and sighed. Are you feeling better? I don't know, she sighed. How are we going to tell people we're dating? People already know we're sleeping together. Deku shrugged. We can just keep being seen together, they'll catch on. Achiko considered it. She would run it past her social media manager in the morning. She sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. I love you, she murmured. I love you too. Eat your dinner for me. He kissed her forehead gently. A Sunday kind of love. Deku smiled weakly as he watched Achiko eat her dinner. He sighed softly before yawning and looking at the TV screen. Are you feeling better? Achiko nodded her head. Yeah, she murmured. I thought about it, and I'm not ashamed. I love you, you're a good person, and anyone who has a problem with us dating doesn't matter. Deku's heart soared, though he had a nagging feeling that this would probably go away as soon as they were seen together in public again. He pushed the thoughts away, kissing her forehead and holding her in his arms. Are you tired? I was thinking, maybe I could look at your suit tonight. Achiko nodded with a soft smile. Okay, she murmured, throwing the box her food had been in away and climbing out her bed with a sigh. Deku smiled at her as she grabbed it out of one of her drawers. Deku looked at it and blushed. He suspected it would be hard for him to act professional when he saw her in it. Achiko laughed softly and rolled her eyes. Nervous? And no, I like superhero costumes. He blushed. Achiko laughed. Well, you're going to have to get used to being around people in hero costumes, especially me. Deku nodded. Why, yeah, of course. I'm excited to see it. Achiko smiled, putting her costume on. Deku smiled at her. taking her hand and leading her down to his lab. His face was red, he seemed flustered. Achiko laughed. We've slept together twice, Deku, she purred. Deku sighed, looking at her costume and sighing. See, can you tell me what it has in it to help you? I would like to give you robotic wings, or rocket boots maybe, and a helmet. Achiko smiled at him and nodded, showing him her grappling hooks inside of her gauntlets. He smiled, nodding. Those are nice. Tomorrow will take you somewhere you can show me how they work. Achiko nodded, looking at him as she huffed. Do you like the heels on the boots? And how skin-tight it is? She frowned. I don't dislike them, but I would be okay with it if you drew up some new ideas for me. Deku nodded. I might. Achiko smiled at him and looked at the floor. He was so cute when he was flustered. Do you want to take it off? She purred, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Deku looked at her and huffed, more than anything he thought, but he had to be professional. After. I want to get your suit enhanced as quickly as I can so that we can show people that I'm serious about turning this around. Achiko nodded, smiling at him as she bounced on her toes. Deku looked at her boots and sighed. So Kaken said you could return to work whenever you want, but maybe I can have the rest of the week to make enhancements. Yeah, Kaken said he's sorry and you can go back to work if you want, or take the rest of the week off. Achiko nodded her head. I can take the week to help you with my suit, she murmured. Deku smiled at her and nodded. Sounds great. He slipped his arms around her gently, pecking her lips. Achiko smiled at him with a sigh. Didn't your older costume have a helmet? Yeah, she murmured. I'll design you another one, he smiled softly. Maybe some cute constellations on your sleeves, or some kind of print, he smiled softly. We'll figure it out. Achiko watched him and sighed. Sounds nice? She watched him and cocked her head to the side. Deku sighed, grabbing her arm and looking at it. We'll look at your gauntlets and your boots tomorrow, and then I'll start looking into helmets and gloves. So zero-gravity quirks tend to go hand in hand with atrophy and heart issues. Do you mind if maybe I program my AI into your suit? To keep an eye on your heart. AI? I have an AI named Toshinori. He's sort of been my only friend since I moved away from my mom. Deku sighed. Achiko grinned and nodded. I would like that a lot. She murmured. Deku grinned. He was going to protect her. He was going to keep her safe and alive. He was going to be useful. He pressed a kiss to her lips, hugging her close and nuzzling her cheek. He hugged her close and sighed. I'm going to help keep you safe, he murmured. He was going to do something good for the world. He smiled. I'm going to put my name on your costume. Is that okay? Yeah. She murmured. That would help people know that you are helping me, that you're a good guy. It would help villains know not to F with you. Deku replied. What? Any villain who hurts you needs to know that I'll come at them with all I've got. Deku smirked, pressing a kiss to Achiko's forehead. You can't be seen ending anymore, Deku. If someone hurts you, all bets are off, he replied. Achiko blushed. That's very sweet. Deku smiled at her, hugging her and kissing the top of her head. Do you want it on your helmet or across your ass? Achiko laughed, looking at him with a sigh. What exactly are you planning to put on my costume? Property of Deku, he said with a soft laugh. He was joking, mostly. If people knew he had made this for her, they would be less likely to mess with her. Achiko blushed. I don't know. She murmured. People would probably think you were referring to me, and not just my costume. Deku laughed. How about something like made by Deku? That would be better. Deku smiled at her, kissing her softly as he hugged her close. But you are mine, right? And not my property, but you're my girl, right? Achiko smiled at him, nodding her head. Of course I am. She kissed him softly. He grinned, kissing back, holding her tight and sighing. Do you want to? Can I not be professional anymore? Achiko laughed. Do you ask all your customers if they belong to you? Deku blushed. Fair question. He held her gently, kissing her deeply as he huffed. I love you, she said softly, as Deku hugged her against his chest. She said, I'm ready to take your hero costume off now. She smiled at him with a laugh. Okay, she murmured, leading his hands to her zipper. Deku smiled at Achiko as he led her up the stairs to their house. Deku kissed her gently as he sighed. It's 7, Deku murmured. We stayed in bed all day, might as well go back. He shrugged his shoulders. He would enhance her suit in the morning. Hopefully you can go back to work the day after tomorrow in an improved suit. Deku grinned. He was excited to see what he could do. He knew that people would probably have an adverse reaction to their relationship at first, but after he helped people for a while, he could earn his place next to her, in at least some people's eyes. He pressed his lips to hers gently again as he sighed. We can watch more of that host show if you want, he murmured. Achiko smiled. We can watch something you like, too if you want. Deku sighed. I mean, you helped me realize my childhood dream of sleeping with a pro hero, so I really owe you. Well, you're upgrading my suit, she murmured. I would say we're even. Why don't you tell me what you want to watch, Deku? Deku blushed. I want to watch our on high school host club. Achiko giggled. I suspected so. Deku rolled his eyes with a soft laugh. It's a good show, he replied with a huff as Deku grabbed her hand and led her back to his bedroom where he curled up with her and sighed as he watched her turn on the show they had been watching all day. He could be happy just doing this for the rest of his life. He wanted to grow old with her, snuggle her every day for the rest of his life. She said, Do you want to bake cookies? Sure. What kind of cookies were you thinking? Just sugar cookies. Deku shrugged, thinking it would be fun to decorate them. Achiko grinned as she climbed out of bed and sighed. You have everything to make sugar cookies? Yes. I always have the stuff to make sugar cookies. Achiko giggled, looking at the ground. You're a dork. And you love it, he smirked, pecking her lips. I do, she smiled, going and getting the stuff to make sugar cookies out. Achiko smiled at him as he got out pro-hero-themed cookie cutters. Those look vintage. I got them as a child, so I guess? Deku laughed at the ground. Is that a dynamite one I see? It might be. Deku frowned. He forgot he had bought that. He blushed, taking it off the counter. No. It's sweet. Achiko laughed, looking at the ground. Deku smiled at her. You're sweet. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her lips gently. She laughed, beginning to whisk together the dry ingredients as Deku wiped off his counter. I can't wait to introduce you to my mom. She's going to love you. Deku smiled at her, kissing her head. Achiko blushed. Yeah, and then you can meet my parents. I'm sure they'll love you too. Deku frowned. Preheating the oven, I'll redeem my image and I'm sure that they'll warm up to me fast, he sighed, hugging her close and kissing between her eyes. Achiko sighed. The dough needs to chill overnight. Deku smirked at her. It doesn't have to, he replied. Achiko pretended to gasp. You heathen. Yeah. Deku smirked. I say we roll it immediately and put them straight on the cookie sheet. The lavender haze. Deku grinned at Achiko as she slipped on her revamped suit. He had never been so proud of anything in his life. You look amazing, he murmured, kissing between her eyes. Achiko smiled at him and looked at her feet. Yeah? I agree, it looks amazing. She slipped her arms around Deku and pressed a kiss to his head. Deku blushed, hugging her close and nuzzling her face. Ready to go? Achiko nodded. You're going to stick around base all day? Deku nodded his head. I'm worried that your boots will malfunction. I tried to get them as fast as I could. They're temporary until we get the wings done. But I want to be there if they malfunction. Deku sighed. Actually, maybe you shouldn't wear them, he frowned, cocking his head to the side. I'm sure it will be okay. She murmured, I trust you. She kissed him gently as she put them on her feet. Deku looked at them, concern written all over his face. He looked up at her and it melted away. He kissed her cheek. I was thinking we could take my car today, she murmured. Deku shook his head. That thing is a death trap. If you don't want to take Black Beauty, then we can take the bus. Achiko sighed. We'll take your car then. Deku nodded with a grin, grabbing his keys and heading out the door with Achiko's hand in his. He opened the car door for her before climbing into the driver's side. Tashinori. Status on Achiko? Achiko Uraraka. Status, stable. Deku grinned. Thank you. He looked at Achiko's eyes and kissed her forehead. You can ask him whatever you want. Can I ask him about your safety? She murmured. Deku nodded once, blushing a little. Yes. Why you can, he murmured, kissing her gently. He never thought he would have someone in his life who would care if he lived or died. He drove her to Bakugo's agency, stepping out of the car and holding her hand as they walked inside together. He tensed as he saw all of the glares from the pro-heroes around the building and heard the whispers. It took everything in him not to get defensive and angry. He deserved all of it. He had hurt everyone here in some way, and now here he was, hand in hand with a person they cared about. She was wearing tech with his name on it, marks on her he had left. Their disdain was understandable. Pinky came up to them, a big smile on her face. "Hey girl. Heard you've had one hell of a weekend." She looked Deku up and down in a way that made him feel 2 inches tall. "Why, Achiko murmured, "I fell in love." Pinky looked concerned. "In 3 days? It sounds silly, but yeah." Achiko murmured. "It sounds impossible, babe." "I thought so too, but it's what happened," she murmured. Mina looked at Deku, and at Achiko's new suit. It sounded like mind control to her, but Bakugo was her boss, and he trusted Deku for some reason, so she couldn't do anything about it, not yet anyways. "Do you, I guess?" Mina shrugged, going back to her office. Deku smiled at Achiko weakly as they went to her office and sat at her desk. She typed on her computer for a while. "What are you doing?" Deku murmured. "Just answering emails," she murmured. Deku nodded with a sigh, resting his head on his hands. "Sorry, Deku-kun. Hero work is actually mostly paperwork." Achiko murmured. Deku smiled at her weakly. "I figured. I just don't like the looks I've been getting all morning." He sighed. "I know I deserve them, but it's just difficult." It was a big part of why he had taken as long as he had to start trying to turn himself around. A reason, but not the most daunting one. His phone was heavy in his pocket, terrified of the day he had to tell the wrong person he was turning over a new leaf, and would be making weapons for heroes from now on. He needed to update his security. Someone he cared about lived in his home now. "You okay? You've been talking to yourself." "I'm fine, just thinking about chores." Deku sighed, smiling and waving as he noticed that Pinky charge bolt and earphone jack had all been watching them for quite some time. "Your friends do not like me." Achiko laughed at her feet and shook her head. "They'll warm up to you." Deku kissed her forehead and sighed as he sat at her desk and drummed his fingers on it. She stood up. "Can we close the blinds or something?" "I think that would look suspicious," she replied. Deku looked at her with a frown but nodded. Maybe he should go work on their house, but then he thought about the boots, and he knew he couldn't leave her side. He huffed, looking around her office for something to do. She had some teddy bears and blankets. He assumed they were for rescues. There wasn't a lot of tech. He could add some, but he would have to go home and grab parts before he could do that. He looked up when Achiko sat up straighter. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Sue is just calling me to her office. She wants me to go alone." Deku frowned, looking at her feet and hugging himself. "But if your feet start feeling hot, take the boots off. In fact, just take them off now." "I'm not going to walk around the agency barefoot." Deku frowned. "I'll lend you my sneakers." But Achiko was out the door. She walked down the hall, sitting at Sue's desk and looking at her with a frown. "Hi," she said softly. Sue gave her a forced smile in reply. "We're worried about you, Kirby." "I mean, I understand, but dash." No, but you know this guy for one day and you are acting completely out of character." "We haven't seen each other since I've met him. How do you know I haven't been acting like myself?" "The Achiko I went to high school with wouldn't move in on the first date. She is more composed and logical than that." Sue had a hard time looking at Achiko's eyes. She was angry, but more than anything, she was worried about her friend. Achiko blushed. "Love changes you?" "Not in a day." "How would you know? You haven't dated since your first year." "This isn't about me." It stung, but she was being actively antagonistic. "Your behavior. It shows a lot of signs of mind control. You're not acting weird, doing what a villain tells you to do. He's literally branded you Achiko. Not to mention the love bites that her old suit would have covered." "It's not like that. You have to believe me." "I do believe you. But I think you're being manipulated." It seemed like the Achiko she knew was being drowned in hormones and endorphins, which was what love was, but it seemed much more potent than what love was supposed to be. Like Achiko was being drugged. Achiko was trying to hide her frustration. Sue was trying to be nice. I should get back to him, he worries." Sue frowned. "You've been away from him for 2 minutes. Achiko sighed. "He's in a building full of people who hate him. He's uneasy." Sue nodded. "See, can I meet him?" Achiko nodded. "Yeah." She stood up, leading her to her own office and frowning as she walked into Deku sitting in the corner, wrapped in one of her blankets for rescues. Are you okay? Achiko murmured. I'm fine. I was worried about your boots and I was trying to comfort myself. He looked at Sue and stood up, holding his hand out for her and smiling awkwardly, trying to play it cool. Sue frowned. He seemed more like the boy Bakugo had described than the man. Kind green eyes, a warm crooked smile. Sue could see how Achiko could lose herself in his orbit. She shook his hand, reminding herself he was still potentially dangerous. She didn't want to upset Achiko, and she didn't know if Deku had anything in Achiko that would go off if he was upset. So she smiled politely. So, Achiko has told me how she feels about you. How do you feel about her? Deku frowned. I love her. I've loved her since she broke into my house. Sue frowned, looking at Achiko. She what? It was a welfare check. Bakugo sent me there. Yeah. What was going on? Deku frowned as he noticed Achiko shifting her weight a lot. Are your feet hurting? Oh. No, they're great. These boots are super comfy. Achiko whimpered. Toshinori. Status on Achiko. 3rd-degree burns on both feet. Take them off, Achiko. Oh. You're a great inventor. Take them off. You are not making me look any better by giving yourself burns because my invention is malfunctioning. Achiko bent down before realizing she was no longer on the floor. In fact, she heard the roof breaking around her helmet. Oh no. Oh no, she had no idea what to do. Deku swore, grabbing his backpack and rifling through it. Sue stuck her tongue out to catch her. Deku shook his head as he got a long metal rod with a hand on the end like the things they use in stores to get clothes down from the higher shelves but bigger. You'll burn your tongue. I packed this in case this happened. He was panicking, but he stayed calm for Achiko, grabbing her with his grabby thing and pulling her to safety. Toshinori. Disarm the boots. The boots stopped and Deku took them off. They were hot to the touch and burned his hands. He looked at Achiko's foot and started to cry. I'm sorry. I'm such an idiot. I knew they weren't ready. Oh. No, I should have taken them off when you told me to. Deku frowned. Will you ever trust one of my inventions again? Achiko frowned. Of course. I trust you. You saved me. She felt bad. You scared me. Deku whimpered. I thought I was gonna lose you. He wrapped his arms around Achiko and held her tight against his chest. Sue frowned. She didn't know how she felt anymore. Deku looked at Sue. She had been nice, and he wanted to make a good impression on her. Do you want to have dinner at my home tonight? He has been eating with so many pro heroes lately. I'll cook and you and Achiko can catch up, and you can see that I'm not doing anything nefarious. That I would never hurt Achiko. He looked at Achiko's foot. Do they hurt? Do you want some ice? I'm fine. She murmured. Sue shook her head. We should probably ice them. And Bakugo is going to be pissed when he sees what happened to his roof. Deku frowned, but nodded. I'll go get ice, he sighed. No, I know where it is. I'll get it. Deku nodded, trying not to look at Achiko's feet again, lest he burst into tears a second time. They might as well be looking at us. Deku looked at Achiko sadly, icing her feet as he looked at Froppy. I swear I didn't dash. Froppy nodded, looking at her friend and sighing. Deku had seemed so much more precise from the other inventions of his she had encountered. She wondered how this had happened, but she didn't think he was malicious. She thought he made a mistake. Achiko sighed. I'm fine. Just let me go back to my desk, she murmured. Deku kissed her forehead. I love you, but I don't think you should be on your feet right now. Achiko sighed, kissing Deku's forehead. Everything is fine, you can calm down. No, I made a bad impression on your friend. I hurt you. I am doing terribly, he whimpered, burying his face in his hands and starting to cry. Achiko frowned, running her fingers through his hair with a sigh. Everything is fine. Okay? It's all going to be okay. Deku looked at her and nodded, kissing her gently and wrapping his arms around her. Froppy sighed, looking at him. You know, I've hurt Achiko too. Really? Froppy was a pro hero. How could she have been so careless as to hurt Uraraka? Yeah. I gave her a concussion. I was focusing on saving the civilian, and I threw a rock right at her. Sometimes we're so focused on one thing, we forget about other things. Deku frowned, looking at Achiko's feet. Everyone knows you're a good person, Froppy. No one thought that you did it on purpose. Actually, People thought she tried to hurt me because she was jealous? Achiko murmured. Deku frowned. The cards were stacked against him and he was terrified, and finding out that Froppy had gotten in trouble for hurting Achiko actually did not help his anxiety in the slightest. He kissed Achiko gently, pressing his forehead to hers sadly. I'm sorry. I'm so very, very sorry. He whimpered. It's okay, Deku. I love you. Deku nodded sadly, just holding her and closing his eyes. He frowned as he heard Bakugo come in. The F is going on? He looked at the ceiling and sighed, looking at Deku and then at Achiko's feet. Rocket boots? Yeah. Bakugo sighed and rolled his eyes. I wasn't going to have her on the streets anyways. He looked at Achiko with a huff. Just get her to her desk? He sighed. Deku nodded, trying to pick up Achiko. She sighed. Deku, I can just float to my office? No. I can carry you. You cannot. Deku groaned, getting her onto his shoulder and picking her up with a whimper. Achiko began to try and make herself weightless anyways, but Deku shook his head. No. I can carry you to your office? Achiko sighed. Deku nodded, carrying her to her office across the hall and putting her into her chair. What was that? I didn't want Kakin and Froppy to think I'm weak. Katsuki left after I said I could float to my office? Yeah. Well, I carried you to your chair. Deku smiled. Achiko rolled her eyes at him. I thought I would escape this stuff by not dating a pro hero anymore. Deku shrugged. I'm going to take care of you just as well as any pro hero. Achiko smiled at him softly. Better, probably. Deku's heart soared. He wrapped his arms around her and kissed her softly. Achiko pulled away. I'm at work, she said softly. Deku nodded, letting go of her and kissing her forehead before going and wrapping himself in one of her blankets again. Now that she didn't have his boots on, he supposed he could go home and try to villain-proof his house. Deku sighed. Do you think you would be okay if I went home and got some work done? Achiko frowned, looking at him sadly. What work do you have to do? I just want to update my security. I need to villain-proof it before I have to tell an actual villain no. Achiko nodded her head. She said softly. Deku smiled at her, going to her and kissing her deeply, flipping off the three people watching them. Achiko blushed profusely as she watched him leave, waving at Mina, Jiro and Denki. Deku left, going to his car to go and driving home. Achiko frowned as her friends came to see her. How do you feel? Denki asked softly. I feel fine. Achiko murmured. Jiro nodded her head. She wasn't sure how she felt about Deku. Katsuki trusted him. And what she had heard about him, he seemed like he was trying, but there were things that still gave her pause. How do you feel? I feel great. Mina sighed. Should we do some blood tests? She murmured. If you want. Achiko murmured. He didn't drug me. Mina nodded. Just worried about your girl. Mina sighed. Jiro nodded with a sigh. We don't know what's going on, and we want to be sure no one is messing with your head. Achiko nodded. Once you guys get to know him, you'll love him, I swear. Denki nodded, looking at Achiko with a sigh. He trusted her judgment, and he trusted Bakugo's too. If Bakugo trusted him to be here, then he trusted him too. Where did he go? He went home to villain-proof our house. He's going to be saying no to some scary people soon, and he wants to make sure that we're safe. Denki nodded. That made sense. Mina frowned. Or he was making weapons for one of his other clients right now. She was worried about Achiko, and she was frustrated because there was nothing she could do. Achiko smiled at her softly. You're going to have to come see my new home sometime. Achiko chirped, with a grin. Mina smiled weakly. You think your man is going to let us have a sleepover anytime soon? Achiko smiled. I think so. We can watch movies and eat ice cream like we used to in the dorms. Achiko murmured. Mina smiled at her, cocking her head to the side. I would like that. Achiko smiled in return. I'm doing great, I promise. Deku got home and sighed, looking at his phone. A chill ran down his spine as he saw a call from one of his bigger clients. He tensed, knowing he had to call them back. He dialed the number. Hey, I'm sorry I missed your call, he said timidly. I heard you're hanging out with a pro hero. She's my girlfriend. UFING idiot. You think Uravity wants you? I know she does. Deku stopped himself from telling the stranger that he had slept with Achiko and she lived in his house. He said, I cannot keep doing business with you though, he said. I am cleaning up my act. Do you think it's that simple? It is going to have to be. We'll see what happens when she leaves you. Deku frowned but nodded. I guess we will. Is that all? Yeah, that's all. Deku was tense, hugging himself close. That wasn't a good sign. He sighed. He would just need to set up traps. Tashinori. I am here. I need you to crank security up to 11. I want you to tell me every time anyone comes in or out. I want you to monitor Achiko's health very closely. I need to know everything that happens in this house all the time. Of course, Midoriya. Deku nodded. Thank you. He sighed, going and getting the things to make traps that he could guide Achiko and Tsu through that night. He frowned when he got a call from Achiko. Hey, can Mina, Jiro, and Denki come for dinner tonight too? Of course they can. The more the merrier. Deku replied. He was a bit annoyed, but he tried to hide it. Thank you. I love you. I love you too, he sighed, looking at his toes as he thought about her, hoping that he wasn't putting her in any more danger. He didn't know which client that had been, as they had used their organization's general number, but he was terrified they would show up at his house that night. He sat down, burying his head in his hands, and tried not to spiral. He was responsible for so much death, so much turmoil, and he had no idea what to do about it. He could live 1,000 lives and never deserve Achiko. He looked at his hands and just started to cry. He was going to get her hurt. He had already hurt her. He reminded himself, burying his head in his hands and just trying to compose himself, but he started crying anyways. He wanted to have a future with Achiko, but he knew that there would come a day when she found out something he did in the past that crossed the line, and she would walk out the door. He sighed, hugging himself as he tried to think straight. She wasn't going to leave. She knew what he had done before she met him. Bedblood. CW razor blades used as a weapon in this chapter. Achiko frowned as she got home with her friends and Deku didn't greet her. Tashinori, she said softly. I am here. Where is Deku? She asked softly. He is out. Achiko's heart sank. Had he gone to meet with one of his clients? Was he safe? Her eyes rested on her toes as she tried to think. Pull security cam footage from the time he left the premises? She asked softly. Yes, future Mrs. Midoriya. Achiko blushed. He had called her Achiko before. That was not the point. She saw Deku standing in the corner, pointing a gun towards a shadowed figure before inexplicably falling to the floor. She frowned, cocking her head to the side. Deku seemed to be unconscious as the figure crept towards him, before picking him up and carrying him out the door. She felt tears coming to her eyes as she called her friends into the room with her. Someone took Deku, she whimpered. Tashinori, replay the footage? Yes, future Mrs. Midoriya. Achiko swallowed a sob as Tsu cocked her head to the side. Does Deku usually work in the dark? Achiko shook her head. No. She murmured. So they cut the power? Minus. No, because then Tashinori wouldn't have gotten the video. Achiko murmured. Tsu frowned. I've been tailing a villain whose quirk seems to be electronic. He has used Deku's machines in the past, so my guess is that Deku made Tashinori immune to his quirk, but not the lights in the house. Achiko nodded sadly, but she hugged herself. What do you know about this person? Mina frowned. Are you talking about the mechanic, Tsu? Tsu nodded. Mina frowned. I thought that was just Deku. Me too. Tsu replied, until I had a conversation with Deku. I think he was probably just supplying weapons for him. Mina nodded, looking at Achiko. Deku didn't do anything. He just made weapons and distributed them, she murmured. Mina frowned. It made sense that he would fall victim to one of his clients if he refused to make things for them. She supposed she was wrong about him. She looked at Achiko and sighed, wiping her eyes. It's going to be okay. We're going to find him. We have a lead. Achiko nodded sadly. I'm just worried he's already dead. Deku's vitals look good. Tashinori replied. Achiko's eyes lit up. You know how Deku is doing? I have been programmed to keep Deku safe at all times. Why did you let him be taken? Deku has given me instructions not to end. I had no way to disarm Haru that wasn't lethal. Achiko nodded, wiping her eyes. Do you know who took him? Of course I know who took him. He was one of Deku's regular clients. Mina frowned. We need a name. That's confidential. Can I have the name? Achiko asked softly. Of course, Mrs. Midoriya. Haru Shokunin. Thank you, Tashinori. Can you tell me anything else about him? Would you like his purchase history? No thank you. Do you know where Deku is now? Not exactly. I know he is on the side of town that he rescued future Mrs. Midoriya from. Achiko rolled her eyes. He's near my old apartment? He was driven to that area before my hardware began to fail. Achiko nodded. Can you give me the address where your office hardware quit working? Block 67. Is that all you know? That's all I know. But you know his vitals are okay? I know his vitals are okay, but I cannot see our surroundings. Achiko frowned, putting her hands in her pockets as she tried to think. Mina frowned. You used to live on that block. Did you notice anywhere that had odd mechanical activity? Achiko sighed, angry with herself for spending so much time at Ida's place. We know the vicinity he's in. We can take the train to your old place. Sue shrugged. Achiko nodded her head. She murmured as she started out the door. Deku was quiet as he sat in an unfamiliar room, looking around for anything he could use to get out. He had been crying for a few hours. He was terrified that Achiko was going to get home and think that he had gone to do business with a villain. He was sure that her friends would tell her what a monster he was all day, and it would make too much sense when she got home and he wasn't there. He was trying to get out, but none of his gadgets worked with Haru's quirk affecting them. He had wiggled out of his bounds. Most of his creations were built with a hero's physique in mind, and Deku didn't have that, but now his entire body stung, and he wasn't sure if there was anything he could do to get out with his babies set to work against him. He looked around the room at all of this tech that he had created, and he felt defeated. He wanted to get home to Achiko so desperately, but he knew if he moved a muscle he would be injured at the very least. Was this how pro-heroes felt when they found themselves in his crosshairs? No wonder Achiko's friends hated him so much. He had created a failsafe so that none of his weapons could be used against him, but Haru had clearly found a way around it. He heard Tashinori beep, and he frowned. Future Mrs. Midoriya has been alerted to your location. Deku frowned. You told her where I am? Yes. She is on her way here. Deku felt tears coming to his eyes again. Great. Thank you, Tashinori. So now he could watch her die by his inventions. He had always thought he would be alone forever, until he met her, and now he was going to be robbed of her too. He hugged himself sadly. He looked around at his inventions, trying to figure out how to get them to work for him again, because destroying them would break his heart. They were his babies. He sighed. He didn't have his tools. He couldn't do much at all without his tools. He started to cry again as he realized he would have to disarm them. He went towards his ray gun. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, he whimpered, as he intentionally jammed it in such a way that he could fix it when he took it home before going to his bubble gun. I'm sorry, he repeated as he disarmed the gun and then repeated his apologetic process with his other babies. It was difficult for him to carry all of his babies with him to the door, but he did it. He frowned when he saw Haru at the door with a smirk on his face. You know, you could have at least waited until the heroes came to rescue you. Are you planning to fight me alone, holding your weight in tech? Deku frowned. Honestly, I didn't think I would get this far. He replied, setting his weapons on the floor gently and looking for which one of them would be the quickest to reactivate. He sighed, grabbing a pack of gum out of his pocket with a small smile. He put a piece in his mouth. He smiled at Haru, who looked, understandably, confused. What? I can't have bad breath when my future wife comes to rescue me. Do you want some? He held out the gum for him, looking at him with a frown. No. I'm not taking your poison gum. Deku frowned. It's not poisoned. It just makes you drowsy. He sighed. Fine. He squared up. Haru was about 3 times his size, but he was going to try. Hopefully he could hold him off until Achiko and her friends found him. Deku hadn't even registered that Haru had squared up before he saw stars, but he threw a punch, it landed, and his knuckles were on fire. A smile came to his lips. He had missed this feeling. He looked down at his shirt, smiling to himself as he put his hands through the finger holes in it. Haru had taken his brass knuckles, but he hadn't taken the razor blades out of his sleeves. He looked at him, hesitating before pushing the blades out of their pouches in his sleeves. He started to throw punches again, watching blood begin to fly. He threw blindly, barely able to see, until he realized no one was swinging at him anymore. He looked at Haru, he was on the ground, all of the cuts he had made were shallow, but there were a few of them, he was alive, right? Deku frowned, had he laced these razor blades with something? He heard snoring and a smile came to his lips. The same toxin he had put into the right column of his gum. He was asleep. He sat down and looked at the man, part of him wanted to make sure he woke up okay, but he also really did not want to fight him again. He sighed as the pain from his own wounds began to set in. He limped out of the building, holding his babies in his arms. He heard Achiko's voice in the distance, but he wasn't sure he could limp his way to her. He couldn't see well, there was blood in his eyes, it hurt to breathe let alone walk. Achiko? He yelled into the street, Achiko? Black, blue and tender. Achiko frowned as she heard Deku's voice. She turned around, seeing a green mop of hair in the distance, blinded by tears as she ran into traffic, sprinting through the street to the sounds of horns and curse words, falling to her knees when she got to her Deku. She cried silently, grabbing his head in her hands. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She sobbed. I love you so much I never would have thought you would get hurt while you were at home. I never should have let you go home. His face was puffy and purple, he was bleeding. She sighed as her friends made it to their side. We should get him to the hospital. Achiko whimpered. Froppy nodded as Achiko lifted him gently in her arms, kissing his forehead. He whined softly in pain, trying his best to stay conscious. Mina sighed. Should we grab all of these weapons? Please. Deku whined. Please bring my babies. I'm sorry I can't carry them myself. Mina nodded, picking a few of them up, and Froppy picked up the rest of them. Achiko sighed, kissing Deku's forehead. Please just take me home, I don't want the hospital. Toshinori has gotten me through worse than this. No Deku. You're going to the hospital? No. Please. I don't like hospitals. Please just take me home. Achiko frowned. I'll take care of you. She murmured. Deku smiled at her sadly, but she couldn't really tell because of the swelling on his face. She sighed, sitting with him at the bus stop before loading onto the bus. She smiled politely at people, staring at 3 pro heroes and what probably looked like a body on the bus. Don't worry. Achiko murmured, this is my boyfriend. He's going to be just fine. Deku whined in pain as he made himself wave. Tsu and Mina sighed, awkwardly trying to hide all of the weapons in their laps. Achiko sighed, running her hands through his hair. They got to Deku's house and Achiko carried him inside. Toshinori! She yelled as she stepped inside, Mina and Tsu following close behind, carrying Deku's inventions. Assess Deku's injuries please. Several shallow cuts on his knuckles, arms and ankles, a minor break in his right wrist and elbow, shallow cuts on his face. Achiko frowned. Can I wrap it? She murmured. Allow me, future Mrs. Midoriya. Achiko blushed. She wondered when she would get used to that. Deku also blushed. Do you like it? He asked softly. I was hoping you would like it. Achiko nodded. It's really sweet. She murmured, I love it. So you'll marry me? Deku. Achiko sighed. I think this is something we can talk about after you're better, okay? Deku nodded okay. Fine, he grumbled. Mina sighed. She supposed this guy might just be a cheese ball rather than an abuser. He had just gotten his sheet rocked in order to keep a promise he made to Achiko. Toshinori finished putting a cast on Deku's right arm. He wanted to cry. He was going to have to learn to build things with his left arm now. He huffed, looking at Achiko with a sigh. He was handling the care like a champ. Toshinori had patched him up from worse before. He had really only needed help getting back because he wanted to get his babies home with him, but it was also nice not to have had to limp home with his eyes swollen shut, with blood in his eyes. It was nice to be carried home by the love of his life. It was nice to feel like the pain he was in mattered, and that it wasn't the result of some terrible decision he made, or just his head getting too hot. No, these wounds were gained valiantly, fighting for something that was actually worth something. Something that someone else cared about. It was nice being taken care of and fussed over by human hands, rather than the robot ones he had made to take care of him. He looked at Achiko and sighed. I'm sorry Pinky and Froppy. I was going to make you guys dinner, but we're going to have to order out tonight. We understand. Mina sighed. We can cook for you if you want. No. I'll order from a place not far from here. Deku sighed. Achiko huffed. She had a feeling she would be eating at this diner every night for the rest of her life, but Deku could eat whatever he wanted. He was doing fantastic at proving himself to everyone. Deku smiled. "What do you want from there, Kirby?" he asked softly. "Udon, please," Achiko murmured. Deku nodded his head, smiling at her, and at his feet, he showed Mina and Tsu copies of the menu he had in one of his cupboards. Mina ordered the udon and Tsu said she would have the same thing Achiko and Mina were having. Deku nodded, smiling at them as he ordered the same thing he had eaten for 3 nights in a row, and then ordered food for the 3 women. He sighed. He wanted to hug Achiko, but he had a feeling it would hurt. He was also sad that his face was all marked up, and he certainly did not look handsome. He sighed. He wanted to change into a shirt that didn't have blood on it. He wanted to take a shower and curl up with Achiko, but he would eat with her friends first. Mina frowned slightly. "You don't look good, babe." Deku frowned. "I'm sorry I dash. Oh. I just mean thanks for buying us dinner, but we can get out of your hair if you want us to." Deku sighed. "That would be nice, but I promise to reschedule. But if you want to wait until your food gets here, that would be great." "I don't think Achiko wants to eat 3 servings of udon." Mina and Tsu nodded. Deku sighed softly, going and sitting in his media room and assuming Achiko and her friends would follow him, and they did. Deku turned on the All Might cartoon he liked to watch when he felt like sheet before beckoning Achiko to sit on his lap. Achiko frowned, hesitating before making herself lighter before climbing into his arms and curling up with him. Deku winced before grinning and kissing the top of her head. Mina laughed softly. "You like All Might? Best hero of all time." He looked at Achiko and began to stutter an apology before Achiko giggled and shook her head. No, it's okay. I think it's adorable, and I am not nearly as good a hero as All Might. You're the #1 future wife," Deku said softly. Achiko laughed and looked at her knees. Mina and Tsu cringed slightly. Deku didn't seem like he was manipulating Achiko at all. He just seemed like a geek who had somehow charmed Achiko beyond reasoning of any kind. It was actually kind of sweet. They watched TV like that until their food got there and Deku went to the door and brought it to Froppy and Mina, resisting the urge to tell them to get out of his house. He was in pain, and he wanted to take a bath. "Thank you for saving me," he sighed. "I'm sorry I can't entertain you better." "Get better soon, Deku." Tsu sighed. Mina nodded as Achiko waved goodbye to them. "I'll see you guys soon," she murmured as they left. Deku grinned at her, hugging her close as he kissed her forehead before leading her to the kitchen table. He sat next to her, watching her eat while he picked at his own rice. His jaw hurt, and his food tasted like blood, but he felt better than he had in years. He had Achiko, her friends liked him, heroes were beginning to trust him. He was going to have a life with more in it than just sitting in his basement dwelling on the past. He was recovering from injuries, but he was doing so next to a person who genuinely cared if he got better. He smiled at her as he watched her eat. "Tashinori," she murmured. "I am here." "Does Deku have any signs of head trauma?" "He does not." Achiko nodded, smiling at Deku softly. "You don't seem to have much to smile about, Deku-kun." Deku sighed. "I have so much to smile about." He murmured, kissing Okiko's forehead gently. "I have watched my blood go down the shower drain so many times. Usually when I get the sheet beat out of me, I just go home and hurt alone. But this time I got told I did a good job, and I got help getting home and I got to be doted on by the prettiest girl I have ever seen." Deku grinned at her and sighed. "I love you so much." Deku grinned at her and sighed. "I love you too." "What do you want to do after we finish dinner?" "I was going to take a bath. You can join me if you want, but it probably won't be super steamy," he sighed. "I could help you wash up. I can't imagine it's easy for you to take care of yourself without your right arm." Deku frowned. "It's not ideal, but I've done it before. I have been a quirkless vigilante for most of my adult life. I can take care of myself," he murmured. Achiko frowned slightly, gently pecking his lips. "You don't have to anymore." Deku began to cry. "I love you so much." She smiled weakly at him and kissed his forehead as she picked at her food. Deku smiled as he watched her, hoping he would be able to repay her someday. Achiko smiled softly at Deku as he dressed himself. He smiled back at her, leaning over and gently pecked her lips. "I think Bakugo arrested the guy who attacked you," Achiko murmured, wishing it made her feel better, but she mostly just never wanted him to leave her side again. I'm worried about you, she murmured. Deku frowned at her, cocking his head to the side. Curbs, I've always had a target on my back. Only thing that has changed is I have more defenses now. He shrugged. And more to defend. He smirked, kissing her gently. Doesn't that hurt? Not too much, I've had lots of broken bones in my lifetime. Deku laughed softly. Achiko sighed. What now? She murmured. Do you need to get you anything? Deku laughed, shaking his head. You're adorable. You really don't need to worry. I've been on my own forever. Having you here to lighten the load a little is more than enough. He kissed her forehead gently. Achiko grinned at him, wrinkling her nose as she bounced on her toes. I love you so much, he murmured. I love you too, she replied as he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Achiko put on some pajamas and crawled into bed, and Deku climbed in beside her, huffing as she slipped her arms around him. They fell asleep early. It was 4 a.m. when Toshinori alerted Deku to Katsuki's presence. Deku groaned as Achiko got to her feet. Stay in bed, okay? I'll bring him up. She got out of bed with a groan, going down the stairs to open the door for Katsuki. Hi, she said softly, cocking her head to the side. You know, Deku upped his security system quite a bit last night. You could have called before you just showed up. Is he okay? He's fine. Do you want to see him? Is he awake? He is now. Achiko sighed, leading him into the house where Deku was brewing tea for everyone. Achiko frowned. I told you to stay in bed. And I decided I wanted tea. Deku smiled at Bakugo. You want any kaken? Do you have any cinnamon stick? Deku nodded, handing Achiko some strawberry tea and starting on Katsuki's. Thanks, Deku-kun. Achiko sighed as she sipped at her tea. Katsuki frowned. You're doing good. Deku nodded. Not the first time I've been beaten within an inch of my life. He reminded them, I'm really fine. Achiko sighed, looking at her boyfriend with a shake of her head. I love you. She murmured, I don't know how you haven't died already. Deku shrugged his shoulders as he sipped his tea. Achiko huffed. So you put the engineer behind bars? Yeah. He was unconscious when I got there. Deku nodded. My sleepy time blades. Bakugo nodded. I checked every hospital in the area for you, before hearing about 3 pro heroes transporting a green-haired corpse on the damn bus. The hell is wrong with you 4? Deku didn't want to go to the hospital. I've ridden the bus with injuries before. Not with 3 pro heroes. Draws attention. Deku shrugged. Well, I'm not a corpse. I can make a public statement. Clear everyone's name. Bakugo sighed. Cool. Just want to tell everyone who you are while you're at it. Deku nodded with a sigh. Might as well. Achiko frowned. I think we should wait until he has healed up a little bit. Katsuki nodded. I'm not suggesting we do it today. Deku shrugged. Why not? I wouldn't look very menacing with the cast and the stitches. Achiko nodded. That's a good point, she admitted softly. Bakugo sighed. Tomorrow then. I can arrange one for tomorrow. Deku nodded. He replied, looking at Achiko with a soft smile. Can I have Curbs for the day? She's been so helpful, and I'm a little bit scared to be alone again. Bakugo nodded. Yeah. We can get through a couple more days without Cheeks. She had built up quite a bit of paid time off since she started working too. He sighed, watching Achiko fuss over Deku and assuming that she wanted to stay with him too. I need to get to Kiri's. Bakugo huffed. I'll see you 2 tomorrow. Achiko smiled at him. Tell Injiro I said hi. Bakugo rolled his eyes but nodded. Deku gasped. You're dating Red Riot? Bakugo rolled his eyes. Keep it in your pants. Deku, your girlfriend is right here. It's not like that. It's nice to see you settling down. Achiko laughed softly, kissing Deku gently before waving at Bakugo. Bye, Kaken. Deku chimed. Bakugo sighed. See you 2 tomorrow, he repeated. Deku sighed softly as he looked at Achiko. Breakfast or back to bed? Breakfast. Achiko sighed, and then back to bed. My Uravity, I am beginning to think that I am rubbing off on you. Why? Laziness, he replied with a shake of his head. Achiko giggled. I'm lazy? You're becoming more and more lazy with the day. Achiko rolled her eyes at him before grabbing some yogurt from his fridge as Deku warmed up his leftovers from the night before. What are we going to do today? He sighed. Snuggle. Achiko replied with a shrug. Deku nodded with a soft smile. He sat at his table and picked at his leftovers, watching Achiko eat with a sigh. "What are you going to say tomorrow?" Achiko asked softly. "I kind of figured what I said didn't matter. Once they see a skinny, quirkless man in a cast, I feel like the public won't fear me anymore. It was actually a fear of mine when I wanted to be seen as a big bad. I think we should practice some lines." "Well," Deku sighed, "I think you should apologize. I guess. I'm sorry for hurting people, and for judging heroes so harshly," he sighed. "What should I say about you? I don't know. Do you think I will come up?" "Yes. You're the pro hero who was seen fang me and then presumably transporting my dead body. I think you will come up. I guess you could say we're dating," she murmured. Deku nodded. He smiled at her. Achiko kissed him with a sigh, standing up and doing her dishes. They climbed into bed together and Achiko curled up with him. "I love you so much," she murmured. He nodded, letting Achiko hold him as he fell back asleep. Deku frowned when he woke up in the morning and an outfit had already been picked out for him. "I'm not wearing a suit to address the public. Ida thinks that if I wear that suit to address the public, people are going to think I have ties to the mafia or some shit. I am wearing a fing t-shirt. Please don't wear a t-shirt. At least wear a button-up shirt." Deku rolled his eyes but he nodded, grabbing his yellow All Might button-up shirt. "Is that blood, Deku? Calm down. It's mine. What the f-? All of my clothes have blood or oil on them. It's why I wear darker colors now. Hides sheet better. Wear the suit that Tenya bought for you." "Tenya bought me a suit?" "Yeah. Explains why it has a pink tie. Pink is my favorite color. He thought reminding people of your tie to me would benefit you. More likely to harm you." Deku sighed. "But I'll do what you want," he sighed, putting the suit on. "Achiko. This tie is broken. The clip isn't on the back. Do you know how to tie a tie?" "No. And I certainly don't know how to tie it with only my left arm." Achiko frowned, but she nodded with a sigh, tying it for him before tying his shoes and putting on a pink above-the-knee dress with butterfly sleeves and white go-go boots. Deku smiled at her, kissing her cheek before sighing. She was the prettiest girl he had ever seen. He kissed her deeply. "Do we have time to "No, and you have a broken arm." Deku sighed. "I don't see how the arm plays into things." Achiko sighed after. Deku nodded. "Promise?" Achiko nodded. "As soon as we get home." "Before?" "As soon as we get home." Deku sighed. "Fine." Achiko smiled. "Do you want me to drive?" "No. I'll drive. Whatever you say." She climbed into the passenger's side and watched him drive to the location Ida had pinned for them. Deku smiled at her as he got out of the car. Ida ran to them. "There you are. You are 30 minutes late. We are here 15 minutes before I speak. Are you bleeding right now?" "Oh shit, am I?" "Yes. Your nose bled down the front of your shirt. Should have worn my fancy All Might shirt, I guess." Deku shrugged. "I have a change of clothes in the car. You are not wearing a Dynamite cosplay to address Japan. You people have no sense of humor." Tenya sighed. "What are you going to say?" "I'm going to apologize for the last 10 years of my life." Deku replied, "And confirmed that I am dating Achiko, and she has never committed any violence against me I wasn't into." Ida nodded. "How are you going to phrase that?" "I got distracted and had a consensual workplace dash." "Oh. This is important, Midoriya." Deku sighed. "What should I say? How can I explain what she's doing with me? No matter what I say, people are going to assume that I brainwashed her." Tenya sighed. "Just be respectful, explain your plight. You can't control their reaction, only what you say. Every pro-hero you have interacted with is on your side. The civilians will follow. I would love to explain better, but it's time to approach the podium." Deku swallowed hard as he was led to the front of the crowd. Vulnerability. Deku stood at the podium with a frown. Hello everyone. I'm sorry for the appearance of my shirt. I got nervous and my nose bled down it. I'm not very good at public speaking, so. Bear with me please." He looked around, hands shaking, wanting to pass out. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. I am the green-haired corpse that was seen being transported by Uravity, Froppy and Pinky by bus. They were rescuing me. I was abducted, and they were taking me back to my home. I know it's odd, They heard my screams from Uravity's house and came to rescue me as good Samaritans. I refused medical care, so they transported me by bus to my home where Uravity nursed me and my wounds. He stared forward with a sigh. I have also been known as Deku. The crowd got louder suddenly. He put his hands over his ears, tears falling from his eyes. He was overstimulated, he couldn't think at all. I have created weapons that have hurt people, but that was never my intention. I only ever meant for my babies to help people. I'm not sure when I lost sight of that, but I'm going to fix it. I've already begun TOTO work on projects for Uravity and for Dynamite, and I am going to try and fix the damage I have caused and then some. I don't expect forgiveness, not right away. I just hope to clear up some of the confusion. He trembled, no one was listening, he had hurt so many people, a lot of people thought he should be in jail, and maybe he should be. He thought about telling them about his relationship with Achiko, but he didn't want the crowd to turn on her. He put his hands in his pockets, stepping back from the podium. He wouldn't be taking questions he couldn't think. He wanted Achiko. When she wrapped her arms around him, he pulled away. She frowned. I don't want to ruin your image any further. He whimpered. Achiko shook her head. You're getting better. You're helping people. Everyone will see that soon enough. She kissed his forehead and ruffled his hair. Deku collapsed in her arms, letting her hold him as he trembled. Achiko sighed as Katsuki took the podium, giving her the okay to take Deku home. She got him in the car and drove them home. Tenya texted her, telling her he would be there to check in that night. She texted him a thank you before getting him to their home and leading him inside. You did good, she murmured. Deku looked at her with a frown. Thanks. Please just don't make me watch the news. He took his suit off. Do you think Tenya would mind if I keep that? It might be nice to wear it for special occasions. Achiko nodded. I'll get the blood out of it if you want to give it to me. Deku took the suit off and handed it to her, cocking his head to the side as he watched her scrub at the stains in his sink. He had never cared about clothes and his appearance enough to get the blood out of them. Tashinori? I am here. Add Achiko's methods to getting out stains to your database. Achiko shouldn't have to remove stains when he had an AI system for doing chores. Deku looked at his girlfriend with a soft smile before huffing. Do you have any ideas for projects I could do for Japan that would help my reputation? I don't know right now, Deku. We'll talk about it with Tenya and Katsuki tonight. Deku nodded. I guess I could work on your angel wings, or maybe Dash. I would like it if you would rest. The only thing that is going to relax me is work, he sighed. Achiko nodded her head, looking at him before hanging his dress shirt up to dry. Not even movies and cuddles? I mean, Deku sighed, I would really rather do something productive. I feel like I haven't done anything all week. Achiko nodded her head, huffing as she put her hands in her pockets. What do you want to work on? Deku sighed, I don't know. He replied, looking at her with a slightly sad expression. I love you, she murmured, looking at him as she sat on the couch and put her hands in her lap. Deku sat next to her, curling up with her and huffing. She kissed him softly, rubbing her back as he nuzzled her cheek. I love you, he sighed, looking down at her dress and her little go-go boots. His smile got bigger as he wrapped his arms around her. No matter how much the public hated him, he had her. Why, you're not going anywhere, right? Right? Achiko replied, kissing between his eyes before he kissed her softly. That's all I need, he murmured, kissing her cheek with a sigh. Deku smiled at her, resting against her chest. Deku smiled. Achiko ran her fingers through his hair. Deku relaxed, huffing as he closed his eyes. Achiko smiled at him, kissing his head. Do you want to go to bed? Deku nodded once. Today. I want to go to bed, he sighed. Achiko nodded, running her fingers through his hair. You look beautiful, he murmured. I'm sorry I'm not in the mood to show you off, he sighed. She shook her head. I dress up all the time. She murmured. Deku nodded, sighing as he kissed her cheek before standing up, going to put on pajamas and laying in the bed. Achiko took her boots and socks off, changing into pajamas and curling up with him. What do you think is going to happen? He sighed. I think you and I are going to have it rough for a while, but I also think that with Katsuki pulling for you, things will turn around pretty fast, she murmured. Deku nodded, kissing between her eyes before running her fingers through his hair. Achiko resisted the urge to look at her phone, to look at what people were saying about him, about her. She just stayed in his arms. I love you, she said with a yawn. I love you, he replied, kissing her head with a sigh. Do you want a nap? Deku nodded, falling asleep against her chest. Achiko woke up to Tashinori alerting her of Tenya's presence. She sighed, getting up and going out to let him in. Tenya was tense. She smiled at him weakly, hugging him gently. What's wrong, Tenya? She murmured, cocking her head to the side as she put a tea kettle on. There are some things Midoriya had a hand in that I was not anticipating. Achiko felt her heart sinking. We can't hold him responsible for dash. Tenya sighed. I know. But being asked about Tensei had been tough, he murmured, I just need time. Achiko nodded her head. I understand. She murmured, pouring him tea and handing it to him. Tenya sighed, looking at her with a small smile. It made him a little bit sad, seeing her move so quickly with this man who really did not seem worthy of her. He had no qualms with Deku, not really anyways, but he couldn't help but feel like he didn't deserve Uraraka, and struggled to understand why she had left him but seemed more infatuated with Deku than she ever had been with him. Deku was a dangerous person, who had a hand in the mutilation of his brother, whether he meant it or not, and it hurt to see the woman he cared for so obviously in love with him. They had been engaged, but she had broken it off because she wasn't ready to join the Ida family. It wasn't a rejection of him, that was what she always said. His family merely had expectations she couldn't meet. It hadn't felt that way though. He had let her in. She had known him better than anyone. He feared she knew him better than anyone ever would, but her heart belonged to a man he was becoming uneasy with again. Achiko smiled at him softly. What's wrong? She murmured. Did I make it wrong? And no. It's perfect, he replied, looking down at the cup and frowning as he looked up at her again. Then what is it? She murmured. I'm worried you're in danger. Why? But. So maybe it's not that, he huffed. It's hard to see you moving so quickly with this man you seemingly know nothing about, when you were so scared to commit to me. Achiko sighed, looking at him and shaking her head. I don't know what to say, Ida. I thought that we were past this. I mean, we are as far past it as we can be, I suppose, but it hurts. Seeing you with him? Then why are you here? Because I need to know you're safe. Uraraka. I am terrified that you have not thought about this. You don't know this man at all. What happened? I thought you liked him. I do. And I want to help him get out of villainy and become a better man, but that doesn't mean I'm happy to see you on his arm. Achiko nodded sadly. I'm sorry I hurt you, but I'm not sure what you want me to do about it now. I love him. I know you do. It's just something I need to learn to deal with, he huffed. She nodded her head, gently rubbing his back. I care for you too, you know, she murmured. He nodded with a sad smile. I do. I wasn't ready to be Mrs. Ida. It was too much, and I guess I never thought it would mean you quit being in my life, but it sort of did. You broke my heart, and I knew that if I saw you, I would just try to coax you into putting the ring back on. So I stayed away. Thought it would be cruel to be around you, heartbroken, with the ring ready in my pocket. Achiko nodded. She probably would have caved. It was weird to think about being Mrs. Ida. She would probably have a couple of kids. She would probably be doing less hero work. She supposed she would probably be happy, but she didn't regret telling him no. She loved Deku. She wanted to be with Deku. I'm sorry. I just wasn't ready to be a wife. He nodded. I understand. Are you going to be my friend again? Because I miss you. Tenya nodded. I'll do my best. He knew better than to promise. Deku yawned as he came downstairs. Hey Tenya, he had heard enough of the conversation to be a bit jealous, but he knew better than to pick a fight with one of the pro-heroes who was going to help him with his redemption. Deku was upset, having heard Ida and Achiko talk about their past together. He knew he had no right to be jealous, but he was. He knew he couldn't lash out at Ida, so he gave Achiko a hug from behind, nuzzling her neck gently. She blushed, turning her head to look at him. He smirked, gently moving her chin to kiss her, pushing her against the table as he kissed her deeply. Achiko gasped. She suspected she knew what had gotten into him, but she was just happy Deku didn't seem as depressed anymore. Achiko let him kiss her as much as he wanted to. He pulled away after a long while. Achiko gasped for breath, looking at him with a slight smile. You're feeling better? You promised me, he said softly after the speech. He kissed her neck. I did. But we have company right now, Achiko murmured, blushing profusely. Deku frowned, looking at Tenya with a sigh. Here to tell me what a monster I am? That you think you deserve Achiko more than me? Tenya sighed, shaking his head. I don't think you're a monster, Midoriya. Deku sighed, looking at his feet. I'm sorry for Tensei. I didn't know what it was for, but I designed it, so I'm sorry. Tenya sighed. The man who did it is rotting in prison. So all is forgiven. Then why? Apologies, Midoriya. I mean no offense. I merely care for Uraraka a great deal. Deku nodded, holding Achiko against his side gently. Achiko smiled weakly as Deku kissed her cheek. I'm happy, Tenya, and I know that I'm safe. Okay? I promise. Tenya nodded. Then I will do my best to cope. Aren't you seeing Hatsum? I'm not sure if she returns my affections. Ida looked at his feet. What do you mean? Achiko murmured. She was all over you last time I saw you two together. She seems to behave that way with everyone though. Achiko laughed softly. I don't think so, Tenya. Ida blushed. I see. Achiko smiled at him softly. You have a lot going for you, Tenya. She looked at Deku. His eyes were closed. His head was on her shoulder. So what now? I take it the crowd did not handle it well. Achiko sighed. Ida nodded. I think it would be wise if the two of you work from home for the next few weeks. Bakugo and I will begin trying to rehabilitate your images, but I think you two should spend time away from the public. Achiko nodded. I understand. Deku nodded too. Okay, alone time with Achiko would be great. He didn't need to go out into public for anything. Achiko sighed as she looked at him. He was taking this surprisingly well. Deku hugged her from behind with a soft sigh. Do you want me to keep working on projects for you guys? Ida nodded his head. Yes. Bakugo will send you projects and pay you accordingly. Deku nodded his head. Great. He shrugged his shoulders. Forgive me, Midoriya, but I am surprised by your nonchalance on the subject. Deku sighed. I hurt people, Tenya. Today was the first time they could put a face to a monster. Of course they didn't welcome that monster with open arms. I applaud your understanding. Ida sighed. Deku shrugged. I've faced adversity all my life. Oka was the first person who was kind to me from the time we met. Ida sighed. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Midoriya. Deku sighed as he shrugged his shoulders. It's fine. Ida huffed. Well, I trust that you two don't need me here for much else. Deku nodded in response. Not really. Achiko nodded. She felt a bit rude, not inviting him to eat with them, but Deku was going through some stuff, and she needed to support him right now. Ida nodded. Right then. I'll see you both soon. See you, Tenya. Achiko murmured. Call Hatsum. All right, Uraraka. That's enough. You're beginning to remind me of Ishido. Achiko nodded her head with a gentle smile. Just want to see you happy, Tenya. And I appreciate it, he replied with a nod before he left their company. Achiko sighed, looking at Deku with a huff. That was a bit rude, don't you think? What? He was hitting on you. You are seeing me. Deku replied, kissing her cheek gently. He wasn't hitting on me. He was showing concern. Deku shrugged. I was also just kicking myself for not taking that dress off with my own hands. Achiko laughed. We're going to be isolated here for quite a while, Deku. We will have lots of alone time, she purred. Deku nodded with a smile. I'm counting on it. Deku smirked. Achiko smiled at him softly, climbing onto the table, looking at Deku with a smirk. Deku climbed on top of her, kissing her deeply as his hand moved up her thigh. The next 2 months were going to be long, but at least they had each other. Deku hummed softly to himself as he worked on his latest project. He had helped Japan's defense advance 20 years in a few months, and with his changing reputation he had been able to step out of the shadows as a public figure who only got things thrown at him seldomly. He smiled softly when Achiko stepped through the door of his lab, going to her and kissing her head. Hello, he said softly. How is the angelic hero Uravity? Achiko smiled at him softly, resting her head on his shoulder with a shrug. I'm fine. I just saw your interview with Aoyama. How did I do? You were barely in it. Are you still having a hard time with public speaking? I mean, yes, but he also didn't ask many questions, he mostly told stories. Deku shrugged. Achiko nodded. How did you do best on Kirishima's workout channel? Because I work out. Deku looked a bit offended. You're so friendly, but you get 5 feet away from me and you get the worst resting beach face I've ever seen. Deku smiled. You're the only one I really like. He kissed her cheek. Yeah. That's what you told him, lady, she giggled. And I meant it. He kissed her neck. Achiko blushed, looking up at him with a sigh. We have a date tonight? She murmured. Dates can be cancelled or pushed back. Deku kissed her cheek. Achiko shook her head. We were locked here for so long, I will never understand why you are still so determined to leave this place as little as possible. Deku shrugged. Because I've spent most of my life unable to leave my house without worrying my life was in danger. I told you. You're the only one I like, he murmured. Achiko blushed. Well, we promised Tenya and May that we would have dinner tonight. Achiko murmured. Deku huffed. I know, he rolled his eyes. Maybe you'll like her, she invents things, just like you. I doubt it. Deku sighed, kissing her cheek again. Well then it's only a couple hours, then we can come home and snuggle. Deku nodded his head in response. Sounds great. He kissed between her eyes. Do I need to change my clothes? Probably. Deku sighed. Fine. He rolled his eyes, changing into the suit that Tenya had bought for him. Achiko smiled at him, putting on a pink dress and white Mary Janes with above-the-knee socks. Deku smiled at her. You're still the prettiest girl I've ever seen, he murmured, kissing her collarbone. Achiko blushed, giving him her hand. He kissed it gently, leading her out toward his car. Deku drove them to the restaurant. He saw Tenya standing next to a girl in a little black dress with no sleeves. Didn't seem like the type of girl who would like someone as tightly wound as Tenya Ida. He stepped out of his car, holding Achiko's hand as he stepped towards them. Achiko smiled at him as he kissed her head. He smiled at the woman with pink hair, held his hand out to shake it, cringing as Tenya kissed Achiko's hand. The dress certainly showed all her assets, didn't it? His eyes stayed on hers though. He couldn't disrespect Achiko and Tenya and this woman by looking at her like a piece of meat. Not that he made a habit of doing that. So, you're May? In the flesh. Deku laughed to himself. I must say, I've seen your work. It's impressive. I must say, I'm jealous of all the attention your work has gotten recently. Deku cocked his head to the side. Yeah? I mean, I feel like my work has gotten next to no attention. Everyone has been so damn focused on me as a person. No one wants to hear about my security systems. They just want to see Kaminari prank a former villain. I have to agree, you're not very interesting, though to be fair, neither is your work. Deku frowned. Is that so? And Tenya is interesting? What did these women see in him? She shrugged. Really the most interesting thing about you is the girl on your arm. I think all of Japan is still wondering what she's thinking. Deku did not like this woman. Achiko grabbed his hand and they went into the restaurant. Deku sat next to Achiko, holding her hand under the table. He knew Achiko was the perfect woman, but he was tired of hearing how little he deserved her. He heard Ida and Achiko exchanging pleasantries, his hands clenched into fists at his side. He was going to learn everything there was to know about this May girl. Surely he was more interesting than her, right? Achiko smiled weakly at Deku as they drove home from dinner. The fish was good. What's that girl who was with Tenya's name? Achiko frowned. May Hatsum. Why? I don't like her. Wow. Okay, why? She's smug. Rude. I don't like her. Achiko laughed. Is it because she invents things too? No. It's because she told me my inventions are bad and well then if my inventions are so effing bad how have they been so effective? If they're so bad you would think that her inventions would have rendered them obsolete. Wouldn't you? Achiko sighed. Wow. I think you should calm down before you wreck the car and when we get home, I will You can do whatever you need to do to feel like a man again, she purred. Deku sighed, study the chinks in her armor. He was going to defeat her. He wasn't sure how, but he was going to. Achiko huffed. This was not going to be fun. Deku got out of the car, getting to his house, taking off his suit and going in his boxers to his lab. Achiko sighed, following him down the stairs. Future Mrs. Midoriya does not have clearance into the lab. Deku frowned, let her down Tashinori. Clearance granted. Achiko smiled softly, going down the stairs with a sigh as she kissed Deku's cheek. What is this about? She asked softly. Deku sighed, the same thing my entire life has been about. Proving I am worthy of everything I have. Why do you need to prove it? Why does it matter? Because I don't want to hear about how little I deserve you for the rest of my FNG life. Achiko. It's hard enough hearing it in my head, I don't want to keep hearing it every time I step outside. Achiko sighed, do you think that people are going to think that you deserve me if you pick a fight with Mei Hatsum? Deku sighed, no, he looked at her sadly, I just don't know what to do. Swallow your anger, turn the other cheek. Swallowing my anger is how I ended up at my lowest point. Deku replied, frowning when he saw how she shrunk away from him. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I love you, she sighed. Just, all eyes are on you right now. You cannot have a pissing contest with Mei Hatsum. Deku sighed with a frown and a nod. Okay, then what can I do? Just keep living your life like this. Is life so hard the way it is? No, he whimpered, no. Of course not, I just want to prove myself faster. Things like this don't just happen overnight. Deku nodded sadly, looking at her and huffing, okay. He stood up, looking at her with a sigh. What now? He asked, taking his gloves off his hand. What do you want me to make for you tonight? Can we just order mochi and snuggle? Deku nodded his head with a sigh. Nodded his head, kissing her as he nuzzled her cheek. I love you, he said again, going and sitting on his couch where he turned on the movie that they had watched together the day that they met. He rested his head on her shoulder, closing his eyes and sighing softly. Do you miss the streets, Deku? What do you mean? Do you miss being out there, fighting crime yourself? I do, but I assume one day I will be able to do that again, he said softly. Achiko nodded, I was just thinking. Since we are getting married? Deku nodded, yes. If we have kids, would I be stepping down from my current job? Deku sighed, I don't think that would be necessary. At least, not forever. He replied. Achiko nodded her head, looking at her legs. She hadn't ever thought she had a shot at being #1 hero, but heroes usually had tumultuous home lives, and she didn't want him to resent her if he had to be the primary caregiver to their children. Deku shrugged, I could work from home, take care of the little ones while you're at work. We could also take turns, like you could go part-time there and part-time here. Achiko nodded, that sounds nice. She murmured. Deku nodded, 2 incomes is best, I think. Achiko sighed, true, she murmured. Deku sighed, I suppose it may not be the most fair, to have both of us risking our lives. He wondered if he should think about strictly administering weapons. He didn't want his kids growing without a father like he did. He said, do you even want children soon? He asked softly. Achiko sighed, I think so. She murmured, what do you think? As far as I'm concerned, we can start right now. He replied with a shrug. Achiko nodded with a soft smile, I'm ready if you are. Deku grinned, sounds good, he murmured. He was getting close to 30, he hadn't thought he would get to have children. Now that it was something that seemed to be on the horizon, he couldn't help but be pretty excited. He rested his head on her shoulder, kissing her cheek and sighing as he held her close. And so it went. Deku proposed to Achiko at the observatory the next week, let her tell him about the constellations and show him Saturn's rings before he showed her hers. They got married not long after in a small event with friends and family. Achiko didn't want to spend a lot on the wedding. 9 months later they welcomed twin girls Katsumi and Yu, and 3 years after that they had their third and final child, named Himiko. Katsumi got her paternal grandfather's quirk and learned to breathe fire. She also had her uncle Katsuki's taste for spicy food. Himiko got her mother's zero-gravity quirk. Yu didn't inherit a quirk, and became jaded and making it all of Japan's problem, but Deku and Achiko have 17 years before they have to worry about any of that. For the time being, they are living happily ever after. Hi everyone. I know a lot of you do not care to hear from me, but I am Taylor. I am devastated to be saying goodbye to what my boyfriend and I call arms dealer Deku in our apartment. I have written content about his girls, and maybe someday I will publish the story about his babies, but right now I am writing a lot of Izuku's start a family fix. In fact, the plot line I originally intended for arms dealer Deku and his babies, with some major tweaks, is going to my villain Deku FIC, not Izuku, not anymore. Obviously Katsuki would have been less involved if it happened here, but I just didn't want to write arms dealer Deku running from the law and becoming jaded again. It felt like a bit of a betrayal to him, but maybe one day I will write the plotline I wrote for him where his daughter Yu becomes a quirkless villain and he has to take her down with the help of his other daughter. I do have a one-shot about him being a dad if you would like. It is called To the Moon and to Saturn. This FIC started as a joke, but has actually become very special to me. Thank you all for reading it. I'm sorry this is so rushed. I'm honestly trying not to get emotional and dramatic about this. I am so thrilled so many people read and enjoyed this FIC. I can't even state how happy it makes me. I want to say all of the songs the lyric titles are from really quickly. It's an arms race, this ain't a scene, it's an arms race by Fall Out Boy. 2 a.m. Who Do You Love? Enchanted Taylor Swift. What You Did Was Just As Dark Hoax by Taylor Swift. I originally intended the next chapter to be called As When They Pulled Me Apart. My Ghosts Are Gaining on Me, All That I'm Living For by Evanescence. Please Don't Be in Love with Someone Else, Enchanted Taylor Swift. Why They Lost Their Minds and Fought the Wars, You Are in Love Taylor Swift. Got Lovesick All Over My Bed, SLT Taylor Swift. Thought I'd Have to Change the World to Make You See Me, All That I'm Living For Evanescence. A Sunday Kind of Love, It Who It Is by Lavender Haze, Taylor Swift. They Might As Well Be Looking at Us, SLT Taylor Swift. That is the end of the song lyric titles. They were a bit of a joke TBH, but I liked coming up with them. What to say, guys? I am so happy to have gone on this adventure together, but arms dealer Deku would like some privacy now. If you like my story, feel free to follow me and read my other work. If you want one-shots about their wedding, the proposal, or their babies, comment. I can write about how they convinced Katsuki to be the children's godfather, or about Deku's less than wholesome work friends hanging out with his little ones, or even a prequel where we see what he was doing before he met Achiko. Adore you all so much. Comment if you want any of them. I'm sorry. I'm not good at talking directly to the audience. Izuku Midoriya loved people, they just didn't seem to like him much in return.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.